So officially, hello everyone. Bonjour tout le monde, and welcome to this afternoon's Graduate Student Symposium focused on research creation as critical spatial practice. We're so happy that you could join us here on Zoom, and thanks so much for your patience. We're getting started a little bit late, and for those of you who are joining us in the space, so great to see so many familiar faces. To situate you, we are streaming on YouTube live from Concordia University's fourth space, which is located on unceded indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. Nous reconnaissons la nation Kanien'kehá:ka comme gardienne des terres et des eaux sur lesquelles nous nous réunissons aujourd'hui. And we make this acknowledgement really to bring awareness and understanding of the history of indigenous peoples and their territories, as well as a call to rethink one's own relationship with the city, land, and environment. At Fourth Space, we collaborate with our university community to activate the research projects and initiatives in development across the university by co-creating daily activities. To that end, we're so pleased to have collaborated with Pulse, who came in here with a bunch of daily activities, workshops, roundtables, and this very symposium for a week really dedicated to exploring scenography as a lens and method for undertaking critical performance making practices in urban environments. It's now my pleasure to pass the floor to your hosts for this afternoon, Sarah and Jacob. Over to you.
Okay, Anna, thank you so much for this wonderful introduction. So yeah, we're very happy to have you all in this space. I think having this moment when we can talk about research in a kind of decomplexed way and proactive and positive way will be kind of exciting. And some word as we see this event is really to give a space to the ongoing research of students at Pulse here and have the opportunity to test things, discuss in a very open and collaborative way.
Just a bit about schedule and how the afternoon will unfold. We have three panels. The first is these three people who I will introduce in just a moment. But each panel will unfold as follows. We'll chat for about 12-ish minutes per participant. Participants, we will tell you with a very fancy sign when you've hit about 12 minutes, so you will know when you've hit your time. It's a gentle, fluid 12 minutes. If you go over, we're not going to cut mics or anything. You're okay. And then after all three people, or in the second panel, two people have spoken, we'll open up the floor for a little discussion. We have some respondents here who will be facilitating some discussion, asking some questions. We can open it up to questions from the Zoom call as well. And then we'll take a little break, reset a little bit, and do the next panel, do the same thing, and the third panel.
Yeah, so just to give you a little taste of how what the broad diversity of topics we're going to touch upon today, some of the questions that will be raised, for example, which learnings derives from a city's materiality? Where do queer bodies connect beyond their physicality? How to generate coalition across distance or difference? Or can conflict and violence be leveraged for creation?
And with that, I think we're ready for our first panel. So the first three people we have in front of you, we'll start with Eija, and then Jayna, and then Kévin. You're ready, yeah.
Hello, my name is Eija Loponen-Stephenson. I'm a master's student in the art education program here at Concordia University. I'm working under MJ Thompson, who is a permanent faculty member in the art education program. Today, I'm going to be presenting kind of my work in progress in my thesis research. For context, I have yet to submit my proposal, so it's still very kind of fluid. And so you'll notice that my presentation is a lot more heavily weighted towards the theoretical aspects rather than the technical aspects of what this project will actually look like. So I will begin. I moved to Verdun in July 2021. I love my apartment and I love the area, but what I love most is that almost every day, and often multiple times a day, I get to move through Verdun metro station. There's something so satisfyingly secret about this vast subterranean space and its perfect asymmetry. I take so much pleasure in noticing the wood grain impressions from the molds which contained the cement as it hardened. What is most striking and powerful about this architecture is the play between negative and positive space. The lines which define its contours are both decorative and integral to the support structures which keep the cavernous chamber from caving in. After spending a few minutes for many days watching fellow commuters interact with the station, I realized that the direction of the lines and the dilation of the intervals between them instruct the pace and path of their movement through the space. Every day I practice the choreography that the station has taught me. I've learned how to move my body through the negative spaces between its pillars, its railings, its gates, and its steps. I practice these motions almost every day, and now, after 15 months, this dance has become automatic. In 1998, cognitive scientists and philosophers Andy Clark and David Chalmers published their book, The Extended Mind. The Extended Mind thesis, or EMT, proposes that the mind does not exclusively reside in the brain or even the body, but extends into the physical world. They suggest that some everyday objects in the external environment are integral to human cognition and function as extensions of the mind itself. Though they mostly discuss handheld objects that can process and or store information, such as written mathematical calculations, a diary, or a filing cabinet, I believe that their theory can be expanded to include our built environment. This proposition is echoed in the work of architects turned artists Madeleine Jins and Shishuku Arakawa, who coined the term the architectural body in their co-authored eponymous book in 2002. They describe the body as a complex organism that is always in the process of reading its surroundings and must be defined together with that within which it moves. In the same vein of thought, architects and theorists Elizabeth Diller and Ricardo Scaffito propose that the body and the spaces it inhabits as interdependent constructs, inseparable from the cultural forces that have shaped them. Concordia's own Aaron Manning refers to this mutual formation of the body and environment as a becoming body. This is a body that is involved in a reciprocal reaching towards, through which it ingathers its surroundings as it forms itself, much like how concrete takes on the impression and form of the structure that contains it as it cures. The implication of these propositions, which render the boundaries of the skin obsolete and the body as an emergent formation interdependent with the environment, is that much of a person's identities and values can be determined by their built environment. As urbanites, our spatial navigation skills develop through negotiating with the architectural structures that surround us. Performing interactions with escalators, revolving doors, and staircases become almost subconscious actions. Functional fixation, a cognitive bias which limits a person to interact with an object only in the way that is traditionally used, limits our capacity to critically analyze the architecture-body relationships or imagine them otherwise. When looking at the material characteristics of Verdun Station and how human bodies respond to them, it becomes clear that this is a transitory space, good for walking through, but not meant for loitering or socializing or living. When I critically look at the vernacular of movements practiced by the users of this space, I see that a certain set of gestures and pace of movement are facilitated by the structure itself. If we continue with the logics of the extended mind thesis, which suggests that much of our learning occurs through our built interaction with the spaces that we inhabit, it is appropriate to ask what unconscious biases we are absorbing when certain forms of movement are facilitated by these megalithic structures. What types of bodies can perform these movements, and what larger economic or social systems or cycles are these movements a part of? What bodies fit into our public spaces? Using the language of critical education studies, I wonder what hidden curriculum is embedded in our functional fixations with our built environment. The answer to these questions has the potential to reveal much about the origin of many sociocultural attitudes towards disability, labor, and xenophobia. The unveiling of this hidden curriculum programmed into the built environment was also a concern of Guy Debord and the Situationist International, who write, "Nothing really new can be expected until the masses in action awaken to the conditions that are imposed on them in all domains of life, and to the practical means of challenging them." Sociologist and philosopher Henry Lefebvre believed that places are made through the mobile flows of capital, people, objects, energy, or matter which course through them. Like how the character of river currents can range from vicious rapids to casual meandering, depending on the texture of the terrain beneath the water's reflective surface. The rocks that decorate the riverbed may be obscured by the water, but their presence is still visible in the waves and eddies which result from the moving liquid accommodating their presence. This is much like when I observed that in the Verdun metro station, the direction of the architectural lines and the dilation of the intervals between them instruct the pace and path of pedestrian foot traffic through it. But it is not exclusively the material conditions of urban corridors which define human movement through them. Riverbeds, which are cut by water following natural topographical paths of least resistance, are the perfect exemplum of the co-constitutive relationship between bodily movement and architectural spaces. Rhythm is the excessive production or the excessive product of this relationship, and habit is the result of our bodily absorption of it. Though we are mortally implicated in it, the geometry of this architecture-body relationship has become unknown to us, hidden beneath surface conditions. In our rapid daily labor cycles, we have forgotten that the symptoms of body-spatial relationships, such as congestion, displacement, and rush, are not natural and unalterable environmental conditions. Lefebvre offers rhythm analysis as an embodied research method for analyzing rhythms of urban space and the effects of those rhythms on those spaces' inhabitants. By emphasizing the dynamic and procedural qualities of space and rhythm through which spatial order is maintained, we are reminded of our agency in this architecture body entanglement. It is the task of the rhythm analyst to mediate qualitative bodily experience and quantitative data to situate the everyday within larger rhythmic structures such as capitalism or economies of information exchange. I believe that if we can become more aware of the rhythms which surround us, we can trace the rhythms back to the barriers, both material and immaterial, which we have lost track of. Once we can recognize those barriers, physical and social, both above and below the surface, we can challenge the givenness, a term that Jesse Rare uses often, of the exclusionary realities, of our exclusionary realities. We can create spaces for imagining creative ways of navigating them that suit our heterogeneous needs and dispute the inertia of capitalism, which keeps us in this exhausting forward motion. In line with Haraway's now nearly axiomatic proposal that knowledge is situated, Lefebvre posits that space is known through the body. If learning is not and has never been only in the classroom, how can we facilitate our students to become aware of and practically harness the teachings and rhythms that our city structures have to offer? How can we teach them to move with rather than be moved by urban spaces? In the 1960s and 70s, there was a movement in Canada and the United States to bring schools out into the urban landscape. Deschoolers, as these educators called themselves, criticized the institutionalization of education as a means of preventing people from educating themselves. These itinerant schools, which were a part performance project but mostly an earnest educational experiment, had no permanent classroom and instead functioned within community spaces using theaters in their off hours as lecture halls, the audience space of the courthouse to learn about law and social sciences, the grocery store is a place to understand human health and international agricultural trade. The list goes on. What is unique about these schools is that the environment is utilized as a medium for the study of standard school subjects rather than being the subject of study to be learned about in a sanitary space away from the messy influx of reality. In this paradigm, the teacher acts as a facilitator rather than a gatekeeper of knowledge, and the students learn through direct somatic exploration of their environment. The cityscape is reprogrammed into a learning space rather than simply a surface for the transportation of bodies goods, and capital. Arts-based pedagogy offers a perfect platform for the revitalization of the metro education movement and provides an access point into the critical practices of rhythm analysis. In response to the metro education legacy, I have been working on developing the curriculum of a mobile reading group workshop series based in the Montreal Underground, which integrates rhythm analysis into the curriculum and responds to the outcomes it delivers. Through play and performance, I hope to have my participants learn to better understand the relationship between their bodies, their minds, and their built environment. In this workshop series, the Montreal Underground is approached as an epistemic site or pedagogical platform where abstract theories are translated through performance-based activities into somatic knowledge. According to Lefebvre, for the project of rhythm analysis to be successful, one must be able to superimpose grounded sense-based knowledge of being caught in a rhythm of a place with a more objective macro data of theoretical concepts which track or justify larger flows. Mirroring the rhythm analytical structure, this curriculum attempts to form a dialogue between textual and contextual learning. When animated, the program emerges as a larger rhythmic structure synchronized or not with the respiration of the city's daily cycles. Its pulse propels the participants on their circuit through the metro. The program, like the subterranean architecture of Montreal's public transportation system, is a structure which the participants must individually negotiate in order to continue their forward movement. This is a guerrilla art education for a body that ingathers. That's it.
I'm going next. Okay. Can we stop sharing? Okay. So I'm going to start by running this video, which is presenting my work of the last years from the end of my MFA here at UQAM, at Université du Québec à Montréal, and the beginning of my PhD last year here at Concordia. So I'm a PhD student at Concordia in the Indie program. I'm supervised by Shona Johnson, so from the Department of Theater, Performative Urbanism, and with also Alice Jarry from the Department of Computational Arts and Design, and with also Sébastien Cacard, which is in the Department of Cartography and Geography. I'm a multidisciplinary artist and scenographer in theater and dance, with a background in architecture and design. My current research creation investigates how scenography performs as a non-worlding and unsettling making practice, enabling to rethink power relations existing between matter, identity, architecture, and urban policies through a process of 3D scanning and in a collaborative way. So with this research creation thesis, I seek to explore both the performative and speculative potential of 3D scanning technology. Envisioned as a site-writing practice, this technology allows first a direct connection with the built environment, and then the transposition of digitized materiality in the realm of the virtual, encouraging the production of counter spaces, within which evolving sensorialities and subjectivities are expressed, and new understandings of places are produced from a queer perspective. I explore the passage between different forms of reality and the transformation of matter, space, and sensoriality by computational operations and prototyping, as well as their recontextualization within a performative scenographic device and video mapping, favoring the emergence of new forms of connections and interactions between humans and non-humans in the urban space. Stop that. Stop my Okay, sorry. Sorry. So during that presentation, I will first develop the main concepts, theories of my research creation while introducing the seat of my research. And I will then present a 3D scan essay undertaken as a tentative of collaboration with other participants. Okay, so I live in Longueuil on the south shore of the island of Montreal in a place called Suburban. It's not that far from here, it's only 15 minutes of car, but because of territory development policies, collusion in the construction, lack of maintenance of infrastructure, and underdevelopment public transport in the last decades in Quebec, it feels stuck in the 90s, even if this is the 5th biggest city in Quebec. But since approximately 5 years, and it increased during the pandemic, a new wave of gentrification is hitting suburban cities all around Montreal. Densification and gentrification processes are led by promoters through capital profit real estate development, and citizens do not have a lot to decide about it. However, municipal initiatives are taken by a new generation of mayors, disengaging themselves with past politics, and behind the opacity and violence of urban processes, ongoing contestation voices are coming from citizens, reclaiming the heritage of working-class architectural housing, but also the indigenous manifestation on the territory. I live at the borders, at the margins of those contesting urban transformation. Art has been a way to position myself into the world and critically engage with its constructions, specifically in urban context, led by the crucial need to anchor my reflection on a site and develop multiple ways to construct a relation with the built environment. I align with Gandhi's call for an expansion of the imaginative and methodological scope of urban writing, focusing on dimensions of the everyday experience, and Kempkin and Junzing, which invite to think methodologies engage with the built environment in variation, adaptation, openness, and flexibility. In that sense, my practice approaches contest urban situations through a working and mapping process, which involves the recording of qualitative, subjective, and emotional data transposed to fabricate new experiences and new understandings of the urban space. Scrutinizing my practice through the scenographic lens established a new perspective on my work and scored the acknowledgement of my queerness, which I situate in the in-between, entangled in the concept of the border. My understanding of the scenographic as a critical device leans on theories and practices following the spatial shift in the humanities and social sciences. Emancipated from its traditional boundaries of products for theater and based craft practice, the inspiration of the scenography as a transdisciplinary practice and borderless design approach defines the critical field to pay more attention to places. Extended scenography is undertaken as an orientating practice which frames concepts and practices of scenography in a constant move between learned certitudes and potentials of practice. Anne's conceptualization of scenography, place orientation, echoes Jan Wendel's side-writing approach. The side-writing practice establishes a straightforward connection between the positional and the relational, while at the same time challenges the criticism of only being a form of knowledge with a singular and static point of view located in the here and now. Positioning as a threshold, the side-writing is always fluctuant and unstable, at the limit of being transformed, dreamed, and imagined. Exploring the position of the author artist, the side-writing is a critical spatial practice situated in the in-between. Leaning on Randall and Elizabeth Gross, the in-between is a site from where emerge movement of contestation against dual and binary mode of thinking that dominate the Western society and the urbanism and architectural field, both in its construction and its conception. The in-between is a space of negotiations that implies a restructuration of relations to facilitate the transformation of identities of human and more than human beings. The in-between contains then the potential to ethically deconstruct or reconstruct categories, borders created, integrated, or rejected through gentrification processes. Yes, sorry. I'm going to start again. The sound is here, but let's do that. So one of the first tentatives to explore the potentials of 3D scan as scenographic device emerged during Urban Scenographies intensive workshop in Square Vichy, Montreal, last summer. Meanwhile, acknowledging the proper agentivity of my self-identification, I favor to think with a more than human perspective and to embrace queer rationality to open up new possibilities for understanding space and time and create new senses of place. Therefore, I observed through that specific lens what kind of queer rationality could emerge from my engagement with urban matter in Square Vichy. What sense of place is creating by the overlap of a digital and critical practice and a queer and performative approach to materiality. I positioned myself outside the limits of the park to observe art and to react to the pressuring effects coming from the real estate development emerging on its surroundings. Staying in the in-between allowed me to create a space for a temporary connection with the materiality. First, working, drawing, and writing infused critical meanings to matter, while 3D scan process acted as an instinctive response to it, a positive and emotional reply to the feeling of collapsing atmosphere immersing me, the urban context experienced. As a result of that, the video you see here was presented with layered spoken words during the intensive class. The spoken words depicted the urban process violence, while the virtual one unfolded a space of caring and tenderness and vulnerability. I do believe that the layering in a performative form shaped a collective moment of accountability, which, according to Barad, is about making commitments and connections. In a second iteration, I asked the other students to collaborate to the 3D scan process. I combined all their 3D scan into a final video mapped in an immersive performance in the studio, where the square was reconstituted on the floor. The invitation here was to take account of the interconnections, relations, and interactions that occurred during the 2-week workshop through learning moments, collective actions, and introspective reflections, witnessing our interdependency, collectivity, and responsibility. Drawing on Jacques Halberstam's theory of and aesthetics of collapse, the scenographic as an unrolling and unsettling making practice was relying on a dramaturgy open to deconstruction and ephemeral reconstruction by the reenactments and resituating of past site-specific actions in an eventual time-space. So to end my presentation, I acknowledge that there is a lot to precise and a lot of technical aspect of that that project, but it's an ongoing process. But my attempt here was to make the demonstration of my side writing approach, how space functions through matter, and the collaborative dimension that I want to give to it. As outlined by Springe and Schumann, for thinking, acting through matter in a more than human approach must not merely blur the boundaries between human and non-human, but operate as a strategy, generating friction and leakage between those categories. And to end my presentation and to make an echo from yesterday's roundtable, I just want to quote Han from her last writing in the book of Tanya Beer, Scenography, where she wrote like 3 provocations to celebrate the interweaving of human things and place. She first wrote that empty space is a colonial concept. Second, health is a criterion for scenographic practice. And finally, design for the feelings that have no name. And it's a close.
It's okay. Okay, so hi everybody. My name is Jayna Mees, and I'm a PhD student currently in my 2nd year in Theatre and Performance Studies at York University. My research broadly examines intersections between immersive site-specific performance and disability theatre and performance studies. More specifically, my most recent work is focused on working with immersive site-specific technologies, as well as access aesthetics and practices as a means of interrogating, critiquing, subverting, and/or reimagining pedestrian choreographies located within and alongside city sidewalk spaces. So to unpack some of my ideas around this, I'm just going to briefly share some conceptual ideas and research threads around 2 of my ongoing research creation projects. The first being a project that I've been continually developing over the course of 2 grad classes, and the second being what I hope will become my doctoral project. But before I go into that, I'm just going to give some context around how I understand sidewalk choreography and how it's formed. So although each pedestrian has their own individual way of moving when traversing streets together, they form what Certeau refers to as the framework of enunciation. This framework is shaped in part by pedestrians' common direction and unconscious adherence to a collectively established movement pattern, which in turn influences their individual gaits. When describing this choreography, Certeau notes that pedestrians' bodies follows the thicks and thins of an urban text that they write without being able to read it. In a similar vein, disability scholar Petra Kuppers refers to this unconscious choreography as an energetic movement that is shaped in response to the text of spatial arrangement. According to Kuppers, the architectural characteristics of our physical environment produce a spatial story or script that our bodies unconsciously read and respond to when traversing a space. So following Certeau and Kuppers' analysis of movement in urban sites, we might conclude that pedestrian choreography is shaped by both the physical environments it occupies and the bodies that it travels alongside. When examining sidewalks in particular, Alana Gareke notes that the urban choreography mandates movement along a variety of architectural, behavioral, and ideological lines. In addition to reflecting how we respond to our surroundings, sidewalk choreography also can reflect dominant social beliefs and, by extension, implicitly reinforce the spatial hierarchies that these ideologies purport. As Surteau contends, these spatial practices, in fact, secretly structure the determining conditions of social life. So when considering issues of access and mobility, this becomes particularly important as it is predominantly able-bodied pedestrians that make up the bodies traversing the sidewalk. And efforts to exclude disabled bodies, elderly bodies, and homeless bodies from city sidewalk spaces has historically been implemented through government eugenics projects such as the ugly laws and the vagrancy laws, as well as through the physical barriers, including a lack of benches, seating options, mobility ramps, and the narrow width of the majority of sidewalks. Additionally, the verticality of the choreography of walking encodes and supports the cultural text of progress and productivity. Sidewalk spaces are transitional spaces that take us from point A to point B, from point B to point A. It's all about moving forwards. And as disability artist Noah Winter aptly points out, horizontality in public spaces is really only socially acceptable if it is associated with something, or if somebody is like sunbathing during like a well-earned holiday, but you don't really see people horizontally, or horizontality isn't typically associated with being progressive or productive. And interestingly, current hegemonic methods for structuring participation in immersive performance closely echoes these exclusionary sidewalk choreographies. So when it comes to immersive and site-specific performance, one of its most attractive characteristics, in my opinion, is the way it aims to envelop audiences in a profound fictional environment. So to perform this role and remain immersed, audiences are required to engage in specific activities assigned to their role, such as running, hiding, searching for a character, or interacting with an object, while also adhering to the pace of the narrative and select ways of moving through the performance site. This can be especially problematic for audience members from the disabled community, as the fictional roles audiences are invited to perform rarely acknowledge diverse ways of moving or processing. As a result, disabled participants are not only frequently prevented from becoming fully immersed, but are also prevented from accessing or being a part of the central narrative. Furthermore, as immersive scholar Gareth White aptly asserts, despite its tantalizing promise to uniquely plunge audiences into the interior depths of a fictional world, even the most elaborately designed immersive experiences ultimately retain a version of what Josette Ferrell refers to as the theatrical cleft, whereby participants' awareness of their own physical presence, as well as their implicit personal biases, experiences, and social contexts, both positions them outside of the theatrical frame and informs the ways in which they view the other within the fictional world of the performance. And as Bree Hadley, who's a disability scholar, writes, this theatrical othering has the potential to become problematic, particularly when it is inadvertently applied to the disabled body. Hadley notes, when the disabled body enters the public sphere on the street, in social institutions, medical institutions, or in popular theater, television, film, or literature, it becomes a spectacle, as spectators in and outside of the theater frequently encounter the disabled body as a stereotypical source of curiosity, discomfort, stigma, or pity. So just as the imaginative projection of self into the theatrical frame prevents audiences from engaging with the inside of the drama, here the potential for projecting damaging stereotypes onto the disabled body may also prevent spectators from having to truly encounter the other, to take responsibility for their relation to the other in the street or on the stage. So the first piece I'm going to briefly talk about is a piece that I'm working on right now in an eco-scenography class with Dean Garrett. And it's called Remembering the Garden District. And it is basically a mobile garden piece that aims to begin decolonizing our relationship to food, and by extension to the land on which our food grows, through the act of caring for plants and recalling the histories of these plants. So the whole piece, I'm thinking, will probably have to take about 5.5 months. That's the whole performance. And my goal is to engage with seniors because during the pandemic, access to food and anxiety around access to food has been a really large problem, particularly for seniors who have been have had to stay at home, or for seniors living in long-term care homes who've had to sort of isolate there. So my plan is to engage with Future House, which is a long-term care residency located in Cabbagetown in Toronto, and the NCCT, which is the Native Canadian Centre of Toronto, which is located along Spadina, and it is one of the central. It's not a care home, but it's one of the central centers that helps to care for seniors, for Native seniors, Indigenous seniors who are living independently in their own homes. And so there's a couple of stages to the project. It begins by me putting out a call for participants who have a favorite dish that they haven't been able to make for a really, really long time, or that they had once and they can they have a really good memory associated with it, but they haven't been able to make it either due to health reasons, because they couldn't access the resources, because they couldn't leave their home, or medical reason, or any other kind of reason. And so I will put out a call for participants. I'm looking for 24 people. And then the next stage of the project is I'm going to have one-on-one interviews with these participants. And we're going to talk about their experience with that food, if they remember the recipe for the dish. And the one kind of constraint that's on the project is that I'm hoping that the recipes will have at least one plant-based ingredient. And so we're going to have these interviews, we're going to have these discussions, and then I'm going to select up to 4 plant-based ingredients from the recipe, from the dish that they talk about with me. And also part of the questions that I'm going to be asking them is about where were they when they were last eating that dish? Who were they sharing that dish with, if anybody? Does that dish remind them of anyone? So trying to get an understanding of the kind of scene that they had, or the memory they have associated with this food, with this dish. And then, so I'm going to buy a bunch of 3 to 4 seedlings of the plant-based ingredients. And then they're going to host a bunch of workshops with seniors to care for the seedlings and have workshops around plant care. And then so once the plants kind of grow a little bit more, then the project is going to move on to stage 4. So for stage 4, the design, I'm going to be working with the seniors to, they're plant wagons, and that's what I've sort of drawn my conceptual sketch of. And I'm going to use recycled kitchen items as plant pots, and we're going to sort of try to revive the memory that the person has associated with the dish. So it might be I remember eating this particular dish and setting the table this way and enjoying it with my sister. And so we're going to restage that in the design of what goes into the wagon. So there's going to be 1 wagon for each participant. And then I'm also going to be designing a soundscape based off of the interviews that I conducted with participants. And so then it's going to be a mobile garden piece that actually traces the pathway of Moss Park Creek, which was an Indigenous waterway located in Toronto. And so it kind of goes right through their community. So the plants are going to basically start along one at the top of where the creek was and kind of follow the pathway. And they're going to be designated stops, and you're going to be able to listen to the soundscape, and it's going to be interspersed with facts about where the plants came from and how they're related to the area and the history of the creek, and the kinds of foods and plants that were a part of that, interspersed with the kind of personal memory associated with the recipe, where the food came from. And so that's basically how that's going to work. And so you can see, this is the map, the proposed route for the piece. So it basically travels along the waterway. And I'm looking into potentially, I'm trying to think of how I would love to use AR, augmented reality, to also kind of bring the memory of the creek in into the piece as well. But that's something I haven't really explored too much yet, but so I'm thinking about it. And so some of the goals of the piece is to decenter the pedestrian as a sole author of city spaces by engaging with the non-human temporality of the plants and reviving the history of these plants and from the environment that they came from in the center of the city. Because we don't move on, like each stop is going to be like, we're not going to move on from it until the plants have grown a little bit. So it's actually going to be, the plants are actively kind of informing the pace of the piece. And in the evenings, because of course you can't leave plants outside in the evening, because like, especially like forageable, like edible foods, because animals will get into it. So I'm hoping to work with like, there's lots of restaurants and cafes located along the path that I'm hoping to work with, and then they can sort of help to house the gardens in their establishment in the evenings. So the communities also shares in the responsibility of caring for the piece, as well as the gardens kind of move through the community. There's going to be an invitation for like along the sides of the wagons, there's going to be like little chalkboards, and there's going to be an invitation for passersby to come and add a recipe to it, or to write a response to it. So that's going to be another way to sort of engage. And the whole piece concludes in Moss Park, where the creek used to run right through the center of the park. And there's a community garden there. And so it's going to be like, it's going to end in like October. So it is going to be kind of like a harvest celebration. And all the seniors who contributed to the like first part of the piece are going to, it's going to be like a field trip as part of their programming, and they're going to join. And we're going to transfer the plants into the garden, and that'll be part of the community gardens like food bank program that they have. So the food will continue to benefit the community after the piece is finished. And then also one other part of this project is that during the part where it's moving along like the path and reviving the pathway of the creek, I'm going to be doing like a live digital mapping of it and sort of share that map in the homes so that the seniors are also like continually able to sort of spectate and understand what's happening. But it's sort of crossing and blurring boundaries between public and private, because the seniors, we're taking like the memories that they have and then sharing it with their community. And then in the end, allowing the seniors to come or inviting them to come to this community celebration where everyone can sort of share recipes and reflect on our relationship to food, and also share like planting strategies and gardening strategies. And so finally, this is my doctoral piece, which is like super, like I haven't actually even completed drafting my comp list yet, so it's super early stages. But with my doctoral project, what I'm hoping to do is, in keeping with interventions with sidewalk choreographies, I would like to create a 3D city in virtual reality with different areas that aim to document sites in which artists such as Tricia Hersey, Raquel Messenger, and the Meet to Sleep team and Liz Crow, who are all disabled artists, have engaged in a politics of rest as resistance within and across public city spaces as a means of holding space and re-choreographing city sidewalk spaces. So I'm hoping to create like a generic kind of 3D city with areas that become specific to the city wherein each activation had initially took place as the audience interacts with a particular part of the 3D site. And so it kind of revives those histories of activations within that 3D environment. The document, the 3D map is going to document these past activations as well as engage participants in a new kind of activation as they engage with the 3D map / like virtual installation. And so the idea is that multiple participants can enter the virtual map simultaneously and do so in a carbon, like a physical environment of their choosing. So again, there's opportunities for blurring public and private, and we'll also be prompting engagements with the carbon reality. So it's like you're able to engage with this virtual city through the lens of the carbon environment that you're situated in. My map will play with scale, tempo, duration, as well as shifting perspectives to highlight each of these sites and to engage in new ways of encountering, subverting, or imagining sidewalk choreographies. The installation will also integrate access aesthetics and practices as methods of immersion. So, for example, I'm looking to explore the use of captions in 3D spaces to immerse participants. And there are actually access aesthetics are gradually becoming available within augmented reality and virtual technologies. So like the captions, and even in VR chat, they're experimenting with being able to allow participants to lie down while wearing a headset. So you can lie down in bed, for example, and still participate and see everything and engage with everything in the virtual world. And yeah, to conclude, the hope is that with this project, I can engage participants in a dual awareness between the carbon reality and the virtual reality, and to explore alternate ways of creating accessible forms of immersion, and also of using virtual reality as a tool for exploring and sort of critiquing and reframing our understanding of city sidewalk spaces. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jayna, for this presentation, and Eija, Kévin too. So we do have some little minutes for a conversation. So I don't know if we have our respondents here in the room that are here for the residency. So if you want to jump off and bring something to the table, you're more than welcome. And in the meantime, I'm also opening the floor if you want to share maybe something that is specifically unresolved in your process that you would like to ask to the audience and to the respondents. Feel welcome to share it with us. Yeah, Rowan? Oh, you have two. Okay, good.
Thanks so much, everyone, for your papers. Give me so much to think about. I'm really thinking about time, and that our time is limited. So I'm going to reduce to just one question to Kévin. I'm really wondering if you could talk more about this space of tenderness. It's really compelled by that language that you used, and how you're thinking about it in your project.
Yeah, so I think I have to develop all the aesthetics of that project, and I already do some tests, and also and I'm going to explore that with you tomorrow during the workshops. And it's the idea how what kind of transformation, computational transformation I use to alterate, to modify, to transform that materiality. And so just to explain a little the process, so I'm using my phone with an application to 3D scan space, waste, rubbles on the floor, for example, and then I bring them in the 3D space and I modify them, and I use like transformation as X frame, for example, just to have the structure of the matter. I change the scale, I repeat them, so it alterate, it gives like a queerness of from the real material. So it's to get something to the idea of creating something uncanny in a way, like something strange, something that is not usual, and and then I animated them. So I'm playing with the temporality of the transformation in space and time. So and in the rhythm and space that I work, it's the idea of contemplate, being slow, being immersed, surrounding by something, different.
Yeah, there's something particularly queer about, at least in my mind, about tenderness alongside these kind of technologies. Looking forward to that.
And there is also something that comes from my practice as designer and architect. So I'm using those tools first as a conceptor, as a designer, and now I'm trying to hack those tools to make them like yeah, just to break their use, their what they are for.
Yes. Thank you.
Is there any other comment, question? Yeah, I can bring it to, okay. We'll arrive.
This isn't so much a question, but an invitation, like a little bit based on our work with Martine this morning that really like activated sound and sight. And I guess a little bit, the first paper was speaking about the metro as a space of learning and epistemologies. And I've been riding the metro here and have definitely noticed the sound, the sounds in the metro and how that might be also part of the project. And also, Kévin, your work, some of the pieces you were showing, they seem to be engaged with construction sites. So I'm just inviting all of you to think and speak about sound, and maybe, Jayna, about radio technologies. If you're working with seniors, that radio may be a technology that actually could be really accessible to them. So anything any of you would like to say about the sounds and the sites you're working on?
Sorry, oh my gosh. Yeah, sound is absolutely a huge component of like all urban spaces. And I think that it's a really special location because it is kind of, the sonic realm is very much this in-between space that Kévin speaks about a lot, where so many things are kind of able to amalgamate into one solid expression. And in terms of like my perspective on just the general vibe or rhythm of the public metro, I heard a podcast a while ago about the sounds that are in hospitals and how those are kind of the tone and the kind of intervals between sounds can kind of create this new affective language that hospital workers can kind of really intuitively understand when there's an emergency or when things are going well. And I find in the metro, there's kind of a very similar language going on. It's quite beautiful, but it's also stressful. And I find that especially during times of rush, as the metro comes, kind of the trains are coming closer and closer together, there is this kind of overwhelming blur of sound, and you're kind of unable to separate each individual piece as you usually would when it's a little bit slower. And I think that that's on purpose. Also, I think this like white noise is supposed to, not make you want to stay in the space, just instruct you again that, this is not a place to live.
What I can say about sound is it's kind of new in my work. In my last video, I bring the sound in my animation and 3D space, and in my work, I think it's an element that makes the link between the real experience and the virtual experience. It's a bridge that can anchor us in the real, but also make that passage between the transformation, and that's where in that middle the strange happen in a way. And in terms of tenderness, also it's and how I work with my 3D modelization comes from the sonic in a way, because all the repetitions, the overwhelming environment, the pressure, also the violence comes from the sound.
I'm really fascinated about, like, for the garden piece, I'm really like interested in thinking about using the soundscape to not only kind of like to convey the piece, but also to sort of like highlight specific sounds that were associated with the creek, and with that ecosystem, with that environment, and then hearing that alongside like traffic and street noise, and just kind of like sitting in those juxtapositions and sort of seeing how that kind of can reframe our perception of the sidewalk space and of the city.
Yes, yeah, you do have like 5 minutes if you want
Okay.
to go on. Yeah.
We were asked to be respondents, so I'm trying to do my job. One of the, thank you so much for such rich presentations. One of the through lines, I think, in the presentation was kind of summed up by Jayna in her talk, talking about the politics of rest as resistance. That seemed to resonate with the rush that you were talking about in your paper, and maybe resonates with, you were talking about slowness and in relation to tenderness, and also maybe I heard something around that in the way that you were talking about giving a name to design for feelings that have no name, and taking the time to listen. I wonder if you could talk about, so you've talked about this specifically in terms of the methodologies that you're looking at. How do you think about this in terms of being in the academy and doing like research creation work in relation to the pace of being PhD students? Is there something about doing research creation in this context that allows you to engage with the idea of the politics of rest as resistance? And maybe that's a hard question, but it interests me that you're all, yeah, is that resonating with other people potentially, or no? Or it just speeds up when you do research creation because you have to write a dissertation and you have to do the research creation. I don't know.
I can
but
try an answer.
Any thoughts?
Yeah.
I have no answer.
I know. When in my project, I like to describe them as essay or tentative, because it's always, the creation is always in the process, and there is never a closure to a project. And so I wrote as a scenographer in a more professional sphere, and being in the university in research creation, the good part of that is that we can always think, we can always dive into theories and practices, and for me, that in between is very productive, and yeah. So that's my input on that.
Okay. Yes, the politics of rest and rest as a political action, I think definitely resonates with my work in terms of like the space of rhythm analysis. One major methodology for recognizing rhythm structures is to disrupt them. And I think that in the institution, it's very similar for me. I have a background in fine arts. I'm not a trained academic. And so a lot of the way that I'm learning how to be an academic is by just kind of messing up on purpose. And, just waiting to get slapped on the wrist kind of as like a way to understand the boundaries of like where I'm allowed to exist and how far I can kind of like grow this tangle of research creation. Yeah, so I think that disruption, it not only halts, but it also is a revealing agent for larger systems that aren't always necessarily visible when you're doing kind of normal academia.
Yeah, I have a sneaking suspicion that when I'm working with technologies like VR and AR, that's going to sort of that's gonna slow things down, not just because as I'm trying to figure out the technology, and because the technology is its own sort of live creature that will shut down on you, like, or just decide not to work in the way that you anticipate it. So I think that that's going to be kind of, I will have my kind of like plan, and then just those are more of guidelines, and then it's actually going to be kind of dictated by the technology as well. Yeah.
I think also in research creation, there's like what is rest? I think that research creation could be in some places seen as like lazy academia, but it's good to like try and, I'm not saying, I obviously don't believe that because I'm a researcher, but just in terms of seeing ourselves in other people's eyes, it's really interesting to see what is considered kind of restful work and what is productive work.
Thank you, everybody. We are going to close this first panel. Quick round of applause for these first three. We're going to take a 10-minute break, which means we're back at, let's say, 27 after. We're going to start right at 27 after.
Okay, so thanks for being back in with us. So now I have the honor to open the second panel, which is a bit shorter than the other one. We have two persons, so T. Braun, thanks for being with us, and Jacob Caines. So and the panel is called Situating Queer, Untangible, Tangible Networks. So without more further ado, I'll give the floor to Jacob.
Hello, everybody. So I am Jacob. I'm a second-year PhD student in the Indie program here at Concordia, and Shona Jensen is my main advisor. I work in the geography department in performance, urban scenographies world and musicology. So today I'm going to tell you a bit about my current research projects, and also, if you'd be so kind, we're going to engage with it a bit together and explore some collective narrative creation and some collective mapping, which is a facet of my research. So maybe just to begin, a little bit of background on where I kind of situate this research. So queer performers and composers within institutions, which I kind of call university music programs, orchestras, opera companies, conservatories, educational bodies, are vastly underrepresented around the world, and specifically in Canada. The 2020-2021 Equality and Diversity in Concert Halls report that's been annually created by the UK feminist classical music collective called Dawn UK noted that of 100 orchestras, which they surveyed, 3 of which were Canadian, a total of 14,747 pieces were performed in their season. 14,010 of those were by cis white men. Many, if not nearly all of those, were dead cis white men. Fewer than 1% of those, other than the 14,010, were self-identifying queer men, and even fewer were queer women, trans, and BIPOC queer people. Statistically, there's a high population of queer people working in the arts, and as a point of reference, roughly 5 to 8% of Canadians self-identify as queer on census data. And although that statistic is likely even a few percentage points low, we are vastly underrepresented to be under 1% representation within classical music. It's also important to note that the 2020 numbers are a improvement from the previous year. So that under 1% is actually a bump up. So performance institutions obviously exist in their cities in a number of different strata. Their interactions with city, artist, performer, government, patrons, and surrounding communities each unfold in a variety of different ways with different intent. And the programming of artists in repertoire and performers, soloists, is in itself an often performative and tokenistic act. We often view these institutions, universities and orchestras, as the home and source of artistic output and voice, but they rarely account for their own membership and the urban community in which they exist. And that population and community has a valid authority over the direction that classical music is headed. They're the people who patronize these organizations and have a very valid viewpoint around this. And so part of my work is in understanding how to restructure, flat structure, decolonize both these bodies, but from like a ground up standpoint, from small performance groups all the way up into larger systemic change. So I'm going to tell you a bit about one or two projects that I've been working on. The first one is this data mapping project, which is just a small portion of my larger research into how and where queer classical musicians create and how they work with their employers as well as each other. The practical aspects of this research center around ethnography, collective creation, study of the processes and interactions artists use to create in an exclusively queer space. But this data mapping project is a little separate to that kind of on-the-ground performance-based. Beginning in September 2021, I started gathering data on queer classical musicians in Canada. And so today we're going to have a look at two ways this data has been used so far: the Canadian database for queer classical musicians, as well as the History Pin Collective Mapping Project. Largely, this information has been sourced via online platforms like Instagram and Facebook and is entirely self-provided by the individuals and offered freely through a Google form questionnaire, which we are going to do together, which if someone would just pre-assign themselves to be the person who's going to do it with me, you can think about if you want to be that person. Initially, this questionnaire was sent to every professional orchestra in Canada with a request to share it with their personnel. The vast majority did not respond. Several responded that asking employees to opt into signing a questionnaire that they could choose to submit or not was a breach of privacy. And one orchestra replied that they chose to not see if they had queer musicians or not, and that to them, they were unconcerned with gender, race, or sexuality of their employees and only saw them as musicians. So I went another route, and through paid Instagram and Facebook ads, the questionnaire was received over 100 responses from across Canada within a week. Many of these people were working and continue to work within the institutions already contacted. And so we'll have a questionnaire look in a moment. Like I said, we'll go through it. But one facet of the questionnaire asks respondents where they live and work. And by entering this data into an online mapping program, I was able to create a dot density map to more clearly understand where these musicians live and work, and with which institutions they work, and perhaps most notably where they don't live and where they don't work. This data was analyzed in relation to the visibility access of local music training programs and professional ensembles, so where orchestras are, where training institutions are, universities, conservatories, and by overlaying these institution census data maps with the respondents in the survey, a clearer understanding of this population is possible. The database is the only archive of queer musicians in Canada, living or otherwise. And the larger site, which I will again show you in a moment, is the only archive and account of queer classical musicians in the world. The Living Archive presents a form of digital community and a space for narrative reclamation of participants' own stories. It's an attempt to democratize the flow of information and story back into the hands of the musicians themselves. So I'm going to show you. Okay. This one first, yeah. And I'll kind of navigate if that's okay. So here is the database of queer classical musicians. So at the moment, there are a few hundred people who have responded to the survey. They all, and I'll talk about the ethics approval in a moment, but they all have their, we have their permission to have their names out in the public, and so we can freely look at these people and look at their work and their life. And this was born out of the specific conversation I had with an orchestra administrator when talking about hiring queer musicians, queer composers, queer conductors, queer performers, and they said we would love to, but we don't know that they exist. I don't know that there is a queer bassoonist to hire, and so out of frustration, here is now a list of musicians that you can hire. I know it's a little spiteful, but it is pragmatic. So because it's part of the collective creation process, I would like to go through this survey with somebody. And so would anybody like to be a queer classical musician today? And you don't have to live on the database forever. I can remove you. But would someone like to be that person? Oh, okay, it's Sarah. Oh, Sergio, do you want to be it? Yeah, okay, wonderful. Okay, I do need your email unless you would like to be Sarah's email.
Sergio Andrade, ANDRARADE.
ADE.
Dot. No, just one E. Yeah. PROF. No, P, like prof, like professor, is that P. At gmail.com.
And I'm going to say, yes, you agree to do the survey.
Yeah, take me out the closet.
Okay. So for the purposes of this database, queer classical musician is defined as anyone who identifies as two-spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, non-binary, asexual, pansexual, gender non-conforming, or anyone else who would consider themselves under the umbrella of queer or gender diverse. Would you say you identify?
Yeah.
And there's a spot, and this is part of why I want to go through this, is because it presents a lot of databasing and searchability issues and mapping issues that I've kind of come through this process, and so it's part of it to do this. It options people to answer further, to expand. Sergio, if you could spell your last name again?
Yeah. Sergio, ANDRADE. Yeah.
Perfect. And then it asks people to pick from this long list of identities. And at the bottom of the list of identities, there is an other section. And so it creates a very difficult but necessary problem to have people identify in the way that they would like to identify and do identify. But when you're creating a searchable database and you are trying to find ways to look for people, if they've identified in a way that is not on a list that is clickable, they're impossible to find. And so it's this kind of catch-22. Do you see one or two that you would like to immediately click on, knowing that you don't have to?
Gay, queer, yeah, homosexual.
Thank you, Sergio. I appreciate this. This is very kind of you to do this. And then we get into pronouns.
Okay, yeah, put he, him, it's fine. I like that one, like this slash. It's good. I like this.
This
indifferent. This and indifferent. I love to be indifferent. So
perfect.
I'm so indifferent person.
And then, do you work in a Canadian institution, in an orchestra, university, conservatory, opera program, chamber ensemble, or new music program?
No, I'm illegal.
I'm going to say yes, you do, because it won't let you complete the survey without it. But,
okay.
And then it asks you for your instrument. What instrument would you like to play?
Oh, I used to play piano.
Okay, piano it is. And province in which you reside, and here's where we get into the mapping conversation. So let's say, although you don't live in Quebec, let's say you live in Quebec.
Yeah.
And provinces in which you work. So let's pick a couple. Maybe let's say you work in
all of them.
All of them, which you can, and I'll put international.
Yeah.
Languages spoken.
English, Spanish, Portuguese.
And it will only let me put in one.
Oh, please put Portuguese. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
No,
Huh.
as you see, is a very hard word.
That's another one. And then we're going to say you work for an institution. Concordia. And then you can put in all your socials. This is an attempt to have people be able to be contacted by organizations so that they, again, cannot say that I was not able to find a queer conductor to work with. Here is all of their information. And then you can submit. And so if we go back to the database.
And now I am a musician. I'm like, oh my God.
I believe you should be at the bottom. There you are. And so,
Yeah.
new job. So,
Thanks, Jacob.
you're quite welcome. Thank you. I appreciate you doing this. So this information was gathered, and it created a number of really wonderful things, but a number of problems. And so the key important takeaways were that it was difficult to get this survey into the hands of people. And it was a kind of organizational and informational nightmare to try and account for all the very wonderful and valid possibilities. And you can see when you look at the list that some people put and tick off many, many boxes, which of course people do. One of the other websites that I looked at is called composerdiversity.com, and they have kind of got around this by having a very finite list of things that people are allowed to identify with. I really would like to not have to do that, but it does solve the problem of being able to search for people. The collective memory and the collective archiving portion of this lives on another site called History Pin. And so, do I need to highlight a different page to go to that is the question. Yes. Oh yeah, History Pin. Yeah, okay. Okay. There we go. So this site, there we go. I was able to take all of that information from the database and start putting it into this site called History Pin, which is a really interesting site because it allows for many different media and information to be included under each individual pin. And so photos, links, websites, sound files, someone's oral history, someone's own conversation and their own words can be added. And there's an unintentional autoethnography that's kind of taking place in allowing participants to also add their own information. So I am able to go in and add people from the database and start to map where musicians are living in Canada, but people are also able to add their own map. And this becomes an act of collective space making and has implications as an online tool to find community and create digital space and an archive of our lives and work, but also as a very real world tool to bring together a marginalized and intersectional population in various corners of this country's geography. It also becomes a very powerful tool to reclaim the narrative of queer performance and queer musicians away from institutions that so vastly underrepresent and undersupport them. As opposition to the orchestras of Canada, the university training programs in Canada, the site has become a place for visibility and representation. And so if you click on a place, it allows you to, we'll go to Montreal because that's where we are, see musicians. And so this is Rose. Rose is a vocalist. And here's Rose's website and information, and you can engage with Rose's work, and you can engage with Rose, and you can hire Rose to do things, and you can explore Rose's work, and you can then, through the map, explore other Montreal performers, and composers. This is Jorge Flores Lopez, who also works in Montreal. And so this portion of my research is very much underway and evolving. It's kind of a living mapping project, but I'm curious to see where the intersection of collective mapping, auto-archiving, auto-ethnographic practice can develop into a really pragmatic and practical tool for space making and cross-border community creation and reclamation of the narrative of queer musicians within institutions. And so that's what I present to you today.
Thank you, Jacob. So we'll pass the floor to T. Braun. Are you plugged in?
Yeah, you can hear me, right? And I think the folks over there are going to share my screen, is that right? Or, that's correct. Thanks, Adela. I share. Okay. Oh, okay, wonderful. Oops, 1 second. Okay, my name is T. I use they, them, theirs pronouns. I'm a second-year PhD student here at Concordia. I'm in the Humanities program, and my research creation project is called Virtual Queerality. So that's what I'll be talking about today. So in this research creation, what I'm doing is exploring what I see to be this rich intersection of trans embodiment and VR, which is a concept and the same name as my project, Virtual Queerality. So what I'm doing is a series of workshops, collaborations, and interviews with trans people in social VR. And together we're creating a living archive animated with their stories and performances. So I got into VR in 2020 during the pandemic era, and I began using social VR, VR Chat specifically, which is the largest social VR platform. And I found and then joined a community of trans and non-binary people there who are building avatars and worlds to affirm our identities and express gender euphoria. So here's just a picture of me with some of my friends. On the left is Walter, who studies the neurological impact of VR on the brain. So he's got those wings. A little hard to see, I'm in the middle. Next to me is one of my internet friends that I met when I was 13, so longtime friendship. And then my VR partner, Kara, is over there on the right. So right now I'm doing field work in VR to find out how queer people are socializing, generating new forms of queerness, and what the impact is on their lives in and out of VR. So this is just a screenshot from one of the interviews so you get a sense of it. So everything takes place in VR. We only know one another through our screen names, and we're in there fully embodied together as we would be in this space. But it's, of course, a whole different method of doing ethnography. So I wanted to show just a quick 1-minute clip of one of the interviews. So this is a group interview, and the person speaking, their name is Lux, and they're on the right-hand side.
Quite honestly, sometimes feels more like it's kind of the opposite, and I'm role-playing my real life, and this is where I really am. This is where it exists. If you really want to know who I am, really want to know what I'm like, this is where you'll find me. You won't find me in real life. I don't really exist there. As I've told a lot of people, that have asked me here, like, if you met me in real life, you really wouldn't recognize me. I'm someone who's been through so many fights. I have the scars and cuts to prove it. I have gone through so many things that I'm not happy about. And this is like the only place I can be happy. People see me here and you don't see any of that. You don't think of me in that way. And so this is more the real me than you'd find in real life.
So, unpacking everything that happened in that conversation, in that clip. It just brings up so many questions about what is reality, what is identity, where do we exist? The main thing for me in this moment is I felt so sorry for Lux, and I said afterwards, don't you wish you could express yourself IRL as you do here? And they said, well, not really, and I can't. They have a number of different reasons why they can't, but what they really wanted to emphasize is that living their life in VR, their VR life, enables them to role play male offline. So it's this really interesting and often life-saving medium for them to live.
But honestly, sometimes.
Okay, and I wanted to, this is a conglomeration of things. I wanted to show just a couple minutes of a non-VR chat collaboration I'm doing with an artist named Josephine Simple. So she's a dancer, performer, and she came up with this idea of a museum of newly discovered genitals. So, you know, she's someone who doesn't regularly use VR, and I said, okay, what can we make together? So I built this VR museum, I built her an avatar, and then I went into VR chat with her and we shot this together.
A list of newly discovered genitalia. The pubis. Its gourd-like shape makes it perfect for storing pee during long car trips. Another pubis plus is that when you're having trouble peeing due to a UTI or pee shyness, you can always let pee out of the escape hatch. One downside of having a pubis is that toothbrushes made for people with pubises are a lot more expensive. The handy-dandy Bartholomew was designed by Mother Nature to be your best friend on the toilet. Its reverse funnel shape and oval mouth fit perfectly on top of a toilet seat. When expelling urine, the Bartholomew's muscles tense, thereby lifting its owner up above the toilet seat into a Superman-like flying position, which provides an extra thrilling toilet experience. When expulsion is finished, the Bartholomew's butler hand feature offers its owner a complimentary mint. This has led to mass industrial farms that keep rows of Bartholomew owners in tightly packed toilet stalls in order to collect and sell their mints. The Escher. The Escher is the world's first 2-in-1 genital and baby combo. Want to procreate? No sex required. Just take off your pants and your private part is your baby. Since each Escher is a complete and functional baby, each Escher has its own Escher, as does that one, forever and ever. Therefore, every Escher owner carries their entire line of descendants in front of them and is carried by their entire line of ancestors behind them.
So, I mean, just gives you a sense of what we've been working on together. So I'm doing something a little different now. In the interest of site writing and kind of what we've been talking about this week, what I often find as I'm describing my work is people have no idea really what I'm talking about. It's a little bit beyond imagination. So I'm experimenting with doing some narrative site writing, kind of going to take you through a day in the life, if you will, of some of my field work. So imagine you're alone in your apartment at the end of a long day. Even though you've been active, you've gone to meetings, walked in the park, and had a drink with a friend, you feel listless. Everything inside looks dull. You don't feel like watching TV or scrolling through social media. You crave something more human. You rearrange your living room furniture, flatten your sofa, and create a nest of pillows and blankets. You strap 3 motion trackers to your body, one on your hip and one on each foot, and pick up your VR headset, which is attached to your PC. You grab your controllers and put your headset on. It's more lightweight than one would expect, but not totally comfortable. Soon, that will become less noticeable. You find yourself in the Steam VR homeworld, a breezy cabin surrounded by trees. You can hear birds singing. Although the clock on the wall says 10 p.m., it's daylight. Time is doubled here. There's IRL time and virtual time, and they don't always match up. A screen in front of you lists your downloaded apps. You could have a solo experience, such as a dance workout or guided meditation, but you want to be around people. You launch VR chat and soothing music plays. In the 30 seconds it takes to load, you see instructions about how to add a friend, reminders to be kind, and warnings about sexual content that could get you banned if streamed or shared. This does not apply to sexual behavior that is not streamed or shared. As in real life, what happens here behind closed doors stays there. Once VR chat loads, you're alone in your chosen home world. Right now it's Hygge night, a softly lit house with a sauna and backyard that has a view of the stars. Like the majority of worlds and avatars available on VR chat, it was created and uploaded by a user, in this case, one named Eileen. You pull up your menu to select your avatar. While many users stick to a single avatar designed by them, you change yours depending on your mood. You pick an anime girl with cat ears, a tail, and a cozy outfit. You can see your trackers represented as gray orbs on your hip and feet. You move your body to align with them, raise your arms into a T-pose, and pull the triggers. Your virtual body snaps into place, mirroring your actual movements. You can now dance, lie down, and hug your friends. You use your joystick to move to a sunroom, settle down on your couch, stretch out your legs, and rearrange the pillows, both virtual and non-virtual, as needed. Lo-fi music plays in the background, and you can faintly hear crickets. You're not sure if the sound is coming from the virtual or real world. The two start to mesh, and you feel completely immersed. You pull up your menu to see which of your friends are online. A number of them are, and you remember that it's the birthday of a popular VR chat Twitch streamer. You click the user picture of one of your close friends who's at the party and select Request Invite. Moments later, you get a notification that your request has been accepted, and you click Join World. Once the world loads, you feel like you're at a physical party. You survey the room from your spawn point. The 3D audio enables you to hear the voices of close-by users. You pull up your menu to check the number of players in the world. There are 40, and you don't know most of them. You feel shy and take a moment to orient yourself. You open your volume settings and turn down the overall volume of player voices so that the number of strangers doesn't feel so overwhelming. You remind yourself about how much control you have over your interactions with other players. By selecting their avatar, you can raise or lower the volume of their voice, hide their avatar, make them turn invisible when they get close to you, or block them entirely. Of course, if you want to leave, you can always remove your headset. You begin to explore the world. It's bathed in blue light and features a lofted house atop a hill beneath the stars. You can see a city skyline in the distance. In the real world, you would never be able to see this many stars if you were so close to a city. After walking through the crowded main area of the house, you reach the patio and see that there's a pool and a hot tub. You spot a few of your close friends in the hot tub and head in that direction. They greet you with hugs, head pats, and kisses on your cheek. Your phantom sense is strong and you feel pleasant tingling sensations as they touch you. As you step into the hot tub, your body relaxes as though you were entering a real one. Your friend Lex has been working on his avatar and is excited to show you some new features. He's attached rainbow wings to their back and demonstrates how you can grab them, stretching them out by pulling them toward you. You and another friend wrap yourself in Lex's wings. Someone has a fireworks feature attached to their avatar and shoots it in the sky. It lingers for several minutes, showering everyone in tiny pink flowers. You want to find Starry to wish her a happy birthday. You're glad to see so many people at this party since Starry has recently been going through a tough time. She's a little doll-like avatar and regularly streamed herself playing VR chat for the past several months. She was mute, meaning she didn't speak at all until recently. She's trans, and once she revealed her voice, which many people perceived as male, she lost several subscribers and trolls started to fill her chat. Compared to your avatar, she's the size of a cat. You scratch her ears, which move when you touch them. You spend the next few hours wandering around the party, meeting new people and exploring the world. You eventually get up and join the dance floor. You meet Avi, an avatar maker whose humanoid body sits atop a cyberpunk spider. She's able to climb off the spider and leave it in another part of the world. She asks if you want to ride and points to the spider's back. You're not sure what she means, but when you hover your controller over the spider, a message pops up that says sit. You click it and find yourself atop the spider. Avi attaches herself to the front and runs in circles around the world. You laugh with glee. Eventually, you glance at your virtual wrist and notice it's 3 a.m. and you've been playing for 5.5 hours. You're lucky you don't have to be up early in the morning like many others, some of whom are falling asleep and snoring. Their friends gently wake them and urge them to go to bed. Some choose to sleep here all night. At first, you didn't understand how this could be possible, but now, having fallen asleep in VR while cuddling your friends, it makes sense. You circle the world once more, saying goodbye to old and new friends. You feel the kindness and warmth around you without the exhaustion that can come from leaving home. When you remove your headset, your apartment doesn't look so dull. You see it with relief, as you would when coming home from a night out. As you get ready for bed, you reflect on the evening. The memories feel real, spatial, and embodied. The friendships feel genuine. You fall asleep, your dreams colored by what you've experienced. Thank you. That's it for me.
For sharing this. I was forgetting the time, to be honest, with your story.
Sorry.
So, no, I think it's a good thing. I was traveling over there. I don't know if other people did. I don't know if someone want to share a thought or something. I guess we were all traveling in a moment, so maybe we can take the time to just arrive here at For Space. Yes.
I think I'm looking around. Yes, we're talking now. We're having a Q&A. Yes. Thank you so much for those awesome presentations. I have 2 questions for T. First, I was really moved by the site writing that you did and that you shared with us. I wanted to ask about, because in the workshop that we were doing, we were playing around with tense. We were playing around with where you locate yourself in the story. And I was interested in the use of you in the writing. Wanted to know, how you were thinking about that. And then also and this is maybe like a personal comment as a person who spent a lot of time in VR chat over the last year, like one of the interesting challenges that I'm experiencing around this, which maybe is not totally unrelated to the question of a pronoun, is that the avatar bodies that are available within VR chat, and then also in places like Ready Player Me, is that what it's called? Yeah. Are highly gendered in a particular way. When I go into the world and I in real life am experiencing myself in one way, and then go in and I'm thinking, okay, looking at just in my case, the bodies for myself who identifies as a she, I feel that they're so caricatured in terms of the way that they kind of represent women, that I feel like they're like the only thing that I can play is a banana in order to not, in my interactions with other people, in like my rehearsals, for example, to feel like a hypersexualized a person with a particular kind of body, Yeah. Which may be someone else's fantasy and really fun to play with. But I wanted to hear you think about those 2 things. And I'm sure you think about that a lot in your work.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you're absolutely right. Yeah, I'm good now? Okay. Yeah, most of the avatars you see, my friends wearing here are really femme bodies, very sexualized. And I felt really put off by that. I continue to feel put off by that. And I mean, I ask people about that and I say, like, also, we're queer. Don't you feel limited? We can be anything we want. And
exactly
something that's interesting that like people are like, I am whatever I use this space and then I modify it as much as I want. So there are a bunch of different things happening there. Like one is not everybody has the Blender skills to create their own thing from scratch. So there are a limited number of bases that people are using and then modifying them themselves. Another really interesting thing is almost everybody I've interviewed, met, has been assigned male at birth, and also kind of comes in through the gaming world. And they're, many of them are trans and they want to present femme. So it's this interesting kind of like, I don't know, that kind of like, there's this weird privilege wrapped up in it, that's what's driving what's wanted, what's needed. And the highly sexualized part, I'm still trying to unpack. Like, I think some of it is like people want to be, these people who are assigned male at birth just talk about wanting to be cute and sexy. But it's not that they're highly sexualized all the time. Like they kind of police one another's behavior, like, oh, don't be so lewd, but they are presenting like that. So I'm trying to understand, honestly, what's going on there. It's very layered. So, I mean, that's kind of like where and I find it frustrating. So where I'm kind of trying to enter in with the creation part is, you know, I don't know how to model things in Blender yet, but like asking someone, like asking Josephine, like, what do you imagine yourself as? She's like, oh, kind of transparent, and my organs are floating around and glitching through my body. And I'm like, okay, I can do that. But yeah, I don't know. It's like,
it's just like an interesting way that our bodies are always scripted by the available choices within the worlds that we live. But it's interesting to enter into those spaces and then for the script to be even.
I'm part of the drag world as well, and I love drag queens, but there is this kind of performative femininity that I think is interesting, but that is very prevalent in drag culture, in the drag world. And I feel like that, in a sense, is kind of like doubled there. So I need to unpack this. But in the you part, this is just like very fresh writing. And I was looking at kind of different ways that people are doing virtual ethnography. And I read a really good Second Life, like directed to you kind of piece of site writing. So I just kind of used that as to be honest, as kind of my first pass at it, to try it out. But yeah.
Hi, yeah. I have a question for Jacob and also for T. I'm thinking about this gesture of taking off the closet, like you know, putting all your data here, inform how much we can, you know, like do all this data, and I'm thinking these hiding and not hiding process that actually inform a lot about the queer subjectivities, right? This thing of when you have to reveal who you are or not. So I'm thinking how much of this you are thinking your work, like, you know, to discuss this in some ethical way also, and maybe if you are also thinking about how you can through the research creation strategies to subvert these, you know, showing up and revealing the identities. I totally understand the political gesture, how much this is important, but also I'm thinking this production of data that's always trying to identify and you know, feeding networks online and etc. So how are you thinking this in your work? And then
yeah, it's a really interesting question, and there's kind of two parts two sides of it that I think. One is I created a queer ensemble in Halifax, where I live, and it's the only marker is queer inclusive. And there's no other discussion about how that list unfolds. There's no requirement or question. And so it's interesting that the real life version of being in a queer exclusive space doesn't ask any of those things and doesn't require anybody to demarcate in any other way other than I self-opt that I should be here. And then to have the online version have so many necessary boxes to tick, and to have that conversation of what do you tick where and how to be able to search for people in a database feels intrinsically very wrong on some level. And that is very much a conversation that I had while creating this. The opt-out of any portion was a really vital part of that conversation. And so you can also not tick anything. You can also rescind your information and take it away from the database at any point. It can also change. And I've had people respond in one way who then send me an email and say, I would like to change all of my answers and take back some answers and put in new answers. And I think it is well, I don't think it is. It's an imperfect system, and it gets at the heart of some things and really doesn't get at the heart of other things. And so I'm not quite sure yet how to navigate that amount of information being online. I don't know if that's a great answer for you.
Yeah, this is it's for thinking about this, like
yeah.
Yeah, and also, like, you know, the census does this kind of, you know, collect data. So I'm thinking as a researcher, how we can also, you know, invent other ways to, yes, to play with this data, but also think how much this kind of view, can be also subverted to other practices. I don't know. I don't know too. I'm just. And for T, I'm thinking about the. I'm thinking ethical questions always. How in research, how you, because, you know, usually when we do this kind of interviews and we bring the materials that someone is declaring by themselves and etc., we have all that forms that the person needs to be informed. You are being part of a research and blah, blah, blah. And also in the VR, all this can, you know, disappear, can disappear, like, and how much of the ethic of collecting this data that is, we know it's virtual, but also if you understand that subjectivities are not, that these limits of what is real and what is non-real, it doesn't matter. So it's actually people lives, you know, there. So how you also are thinking this in your...
Yeah, well, I think the process of doing the ethics review itself, like, could be a chapter of a book or part of a chapter, you know, like saying, okay, so you got to have the person's name. Well, is it their IRL name? Is it their screen name? Like, a lot of people are very anonymous. I don't know the real names or the dead names, whatever, of the people I'm speaking with. So it's like that right away can't be a question. And writing all of this into the ethics review is very complicated to make people understand, even to make them understand, well, where is it happening? Is it, will you be together? Well, yes, but not in the way that you think together is. So, I mean, I wrote my ethics review very conservatively, to be like, I was like, okay, none of this is being used at all. I mean, I have clearance from the participants to show this in this kind of setting. But initially I said, like, it's just going to be, we do the interviews and I'm using the data to do my work. But, oh, and then they were supposed to be one-on-one interviews. But you saw there, like, I scheduled an interview with my friend Lux, and they said to me on Discord, like, I really want you to meet some of my other friends who also have wonderful stories to tell. I said, okay. Didn't think that they were going to be bringing all of their friends to the interview. And then, you know, I kind of set it up like chairs here and there so people could sit apart like we would here. But right away, everyone, like, you know, glommed into one another, and we were all sitting together like we would. That's part of like the social nature of that world. Like suddenly my girlfriend's on my lap as I'm doing this interview, which of course I would never do here, but there it would be like really like almost strange to kind of create that distance. So, I mean, that just brings up a whole other set of questions, like what is the sociology we touch there, and how does that push up against assumptions about what ethical connection looks like. And as we were doing the interviews, which everyone had signed the consent form knowing that this would all be anonymous and not be used outside of research, people kept addressing the camera, talking to my advisors, like as if they were there, as if they were doing a TV interview. And then also saying like, I'm so glad people are gonna learn about this. I just want everyone to like hear my friend's story. This is so important. And like, I was like, I have to honor that part of that, the wish of that community, at least the people who were saying that. So I'm doing an ethics revision so that I can release the interviews. But I mean, it's just opened up all of these cans of worms. And the ethics, it came back to me. They're like, we don't know what you're talking about. So I have to make it even more explicit. Like,
yeah, I'm not talking about the protocols to do it. It's more about this reflection of what means to do a research in a VR contest, that, you know, these boundaries of what we can do and what we cannot do, and who I am or who not, how much I can be telling truths or lying. So all of this is, you know, fiction. So requires all the ethic.
yeah.
Just think about.
And I can't know what's fiction, and they can't know of me what's fiction. Yeah. But also, like, is this a fiction? Are you presenting a fiction to me?
Yeah, of course. I mean,
of course.
We are always playing some kind of fictions, you know. Yeah. Like I don't think that fiction's just on there, but we are also playing fiction here. Yeah. But you know, in the VR, this is so obvious that, you know, as she said, like that appearance, that mode of representation is you choosing an avatar, looks like a manga, like everybody looks like a manga. All of them came from the same kind of, you know, trace.
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Is there another question? If not, we can also take a break, but if there's something that you want to share, yeah, Braun, please.
Hi. Thanks, both of you, for your talks. So many interesting questions and ethical questions around immersing yourself into queer cultures online and in real life. And I was wondering, Jacob, and this comes from conversations that we had about how your database, we're here, we're queer, we're at the bottom 1% of classical musicians. We're here, we're queer, and we mess with your data. So I wondered about the use of classical music and experimental sound and sound mixing, as we had that conversation about that, in relationship to your website or to the categories, if they're the categories, the boxes, yes. So I just wondered if you have thought about ways to engage musicality in this particular work.
Like from a performance standpoint, like the actual,
or a digital representation or sound piece, or mixing sounds and gender identities.
Maybe not in like a using the information or people or data as a.
Can I revise? Because
Yes.
I think that was a broad question. Of course, you wouldn't use the people's information. I'm thinking mostly about your survey itself. So kind of activating the survey through sound.
Yeah. Like use the information and is that what you're thinking? Like
A score? Is it a score? Could it be a score?
I mean, it does. I mean, it acts as a score. It acts as a like a representation of many different things that are coming together, and many different potential, I guess, like sound worlds that are drawn together. It's interesting to me so far how it's been used outside of my own use of it or thought of it. It's been a kind of interesting project not to evade your question on that, but that how I intended it to be used, or how I thought it was going to be used, or the potentials for it have been really vastly different and used in many, many different ways that I was not expecting that platform or information or peopling or music to be used. And so one of the ways is that there have been many more performance connections and communities that have formed out of it external to me than I was expecting. And there have been collectives and groups, and then therefore commissions and performances and actual live music things that have started to exist completely outside of my knowledge or doing or thing, but there are connections that have been drawn from that database. And so I suppose that's not actually connected to the database itself.
Well, I think that's really interesting, because there's this kind of activation of queer music through the site as it exists right now, even.
I think one of the interesting things is we all know that there are other queer musicians who exist. I think that's like something that I was aware of, and I think everybody was, but to just see how many people in your city, how many people are around, see how many people who are in your orchestra that you didn't even know were going to sign up for that list. And it's been really interesting to see who makes connections and then starts making music together and starts creating together and has an opportunity to build their community because they didn't even know that their colleagues were queer musicians who wanted to be accounted as queer musicians within that institution. So that's been interesting for sure.
Thank you. So thank you so much for your presentation. I would invite you. So yes, it's now 4:45, so I guess we should be back here at 4:35. So 11-minute breaks, and that will be the last last panel that we have for the day. Thank you so much, all of you, for being with us.
So I'm going to present my research creation that I think is related to site writing, but site writing in the context of radio and in the context of, more specifically in the context of sound. And this is a collaborative project, so I'm actually sharing not only my research, but the research creation of two other of my collaborators, which we are trying to not challenge, but question the idea of authorship within the space of academia. And how we are going to do this, I'm going to first speak about from my own perspective of what I am doing, first of all. Because when we are part of a collective, we have to first understand who we are in that collective. So my work is related right now, or I'm diving into the concept of listening positionality, which is actually something that Dylan Robinson is going through in the book of Hungry Listening. And I really love this quote because I think it speaks deeply into this shifting relationships of how we do listen from our own perspectives. Positionality is always in flux through an ever-shifting relationship with that which is listening to in the context of listening. To engage in practices of critical listening positionality then requires that we learn to notice different moments of intersection. It requires becoming better attuned to how race, class, gender, ability, cultural background, and sexuality guide our listening capacities, habits, and biases. This representation considers the challenge and capacity of improvising with positionality. And in that way, I've been working with sound walking to actually activate these listening positionalities, not only to myself, or not only my own, but also with the people collectively who walk with me. In this case, I've been working with the work of Gloria Ansaldúa, who is a Chicano poet, who is, it's deeply for me, it's a deep influence. And what I'm doing is creating the scores. When I create stops, and then I read in each stop some quotes from her own work. And in this case, I did it here, as always, using Concordia as the best space to critique the power of in this case, academia, and how academia is not recognizing of many of the times, has a very limited access for people of color. So in this case, I create this score that you can see, and I walk around the school, as you can see here, in specific spaces such as the 9th floor, that we know some of the history that happened, as well as in front of this building, there is some bust of white male academics that also I was questioning in connection through the work of Gloria and Dalsua, a letter for women of the third world. And in this context, I've been working with virtual reality, but also augmented reality, amplifying those extracts, but also soundscapes from Chicago, which is one of the cities that I lived in, and also New York, or in the context where I am walking with. And I amplify, as you can see the video over there, with speakers and people who want to walk with me as listeners. And in this case, for me, and this connection creates some agency, and also is a resistance. It's a way of emancipation. But I've been thinking like how we can do this actually, not only from my own perspective, because I think it's reduced if I want to speak about resistance and emancipation, and also is very reduced when we speak emancipation only from academic context or inside an academic context. So where we did is creating an intersectional dialogue through sound and collectivity with 5 different people right now. We're working together. So this is Victoria Polti from Argentina, Laura Balboa from Mexico, Gabriela Acebe Sepúlveda, also from Mexico, but she lives in BC, and Ana Mora, also a musician, and well, an artivist, as she mentioned herself. And we work with this idea of approaching sound as an auditory pedagogy and collectively. And this collectively speaking is based on the concept of sororidad. So in this way, sororidad also is connected to Lagarde. And Lagarde is an anthropologist who is deeply connecting the idea of feminism within the intersection of gender violence, and how we can create a resistance, an embodied resistance against gender violence. And in this case, we want to explore the word of sororidad with sound through a non-binary ethical and political dimensions of contemporary feminisms. And how do we do these practices? So first we start for personal projects. In my case, I talk to my personal project. Then we go through collaborations, which I'm going to go next, and community are large collective artivisms, as Ana Mora has also mentioned, through oral practices. And in this case, some of the collective work that we've done we start actually with one panel in the Red of Acología Acústica, which was called Sonoridades, Production and Prácticas Colectivas, Producción Sonora y Prácticas Colectivas Feministas. And then from there, we were invited to Sonoridades Fronterizas and Borderline in Brazil, where we actually created a whole, several panels, developing that project from different concepts and perspectives that you can see listed in there. And one of the goals and objectives that we have is to reflect on feminism and intersectionality. that coming from the global north and the global south, living and working, also inflecting our way of how we connect feminisms from or gender or class or race perspectives, and highlighting the critical dimension of oral technologies and how that connection with intersectionality is also connected through sound, and how we can amplify, how we can use sound to create those reflections on potential collectivities as sonic agencies. So another important part of this is that after we also create a panel, we propose a panel for LASA, Red Ecología Acústica, Ana Mora and other feminists created Encuentro de Redes Sonoras Auroras de Latinoamérica that have like at least 10 panels in 10 different, with different subjects related to the use of sound as a collective process, but also as a political agency in South America. And one of the important points of this is how technology is in our interaction in we and us as a community. So how technology creates this interaction, but most importantly, we don't have to be in these terms of not connecting in real life, but connecting through these networks, because many of these Encuentro de Redes Sonoras, for example, they were actually online. So that actually allows us to have conversations online that help us to go through Las Americas and also understanding the different points of intersection and the different ways of how each of them locally connected to a global perspective on the term of the sonosororidad. And in this case, I'm going to talk about the work of Laura Balboa. And this is where it becomes very interesting because, for example, in order to present her work, I asked permission to Laura and Ana. And we always do this. We disseminate the work of 5 of us with the understanding that we give credit, but also we are part of a concept that is collective. And within that part of the concept, we are also disseminated other people's work. And that's what Bulla Radio does. It's an instrument of participatory activism, which brings a lot of work of women, non-binary and transgender artists working in sound production in Mexico and in Latin America. So right now, Laura Balboa goes to, I don't know, maybe like the number 60 program. So it's every week she presents a different artist live, and also through the 2 hours of program, like 2 hours of conversation. And Bulla actually started by our very relevant conversation of how female and non-binary gender sound production and the experimental sound scene in Mexico is pretty much, or it was pretty much invisible. So we start creating information, mapping a timeline. She started making interviews, ethnographic work through podcast. And then a lot of them are transcribed. And then the participatory method of internet radio kind of like open other podcasts as well to start with the same kind of logic or a similar logic of that. And one of the platforms is Radio Nopal, which is a radio station in Mexico, which is independent. And right now they have 50 programs working with 77 people and producers. And as you can see, those are some of the data. And one of the interesting and most, I think for me, is like, actually they developed this Arduino little portable radio transmitters. So they go to different spaces. And they basically teach them how to code it and how to create also some of the kind of like local and mobile systems so they can produce their own radio programs, and also they can send their own, moderate their own messages and moderate also their own content. And I'm not going to go, but if you can go to Mensajito, they have a tutorial And you can see how it's created. And this is, for example, the interface. And this is not part of Sonos Sororities, but I think this is part of one of the how radio, internet radio has grown. It has given many of these spaces autonomy. So I'm going to go really quick to the end of my presentation. And just with internet radio, Ana Mora has been doing and working outside of the academy. She's very militant to do this through workshops, and we've been also working in workshops together. And some of, I have actually one person here who has been part of one of the workshops. And also the creation of this workshop is for women non-binary artists. And in this case, she has been working more in South America through Minga Radio and mapping also feminist sound communities in Latin America. And some of the most important part is that we want to create, and I say we because I've been I've been interviewed and I've been also part of some of the programming, but thinking through and not from the north, but through the south. Thinking also through different forms of creating collaboratively radio, and also from an intersection that also understands that there is multiple feminisms. There is not one single feminism. And just to finish, this is the tool and strategies that are being placed. So dialogue, safe and inclusive spaces, the creation of networks from that spaces, and the resignification of the ways to produce, the process, the relationship, self-care becoming an important part of the process more than the result. And the creation of sources, so one of them, as you saw, is it can be mensajito, but in this case, if we want to do the feminist form, we have to contextualize it more within other perspective. However, Radio Caso and Minga Radio within Radio Caso are creating those resources as well. In oral histories, interviews, and testimonies of intergenerational dialogues, which is very, very important, because we have the most of the time a history, a very wide female history of what radical sound means. But if we see into the South America history, there is a lot of composers that have a very significant experience within the realm of Latin America. And then if you want to know more about or as now some of the projects that we've been working, you can go to Critical Media Studio, which is some of the lab of Gabriela, and you can see and find out more about those projects. And thank you very much.
Yes. Okay. Is my mic working? Yeah. Is it enough like this? Yeah, I guess. Okay. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for your presentation. I was listening to all your collaborative work, and I'm realizing again and again that I'm doing a much more solitary work, as I'm discovering research now in Concordia in the Department of Geography. I have a background in design, and I'm intended, even if it's a Master of Science, to do a research creation project. I am at my second year, so what I'll be sharing with you is a kind of tentative, and everything is still in the move, but I'm happy to perform it as something official here in front of you. So the name of my project right now is Situating Land Dispossession, the Grammaloty project in Antioquia, Colombia. You may ask, I'm not Colombian at all. I'm a white settler from Montreal, from a large lineage of Francophone here in Montreal. So this gives me the privilege to be highly mobile thanks to my citizenship. And in the last decade, I've been developing a lot of very important and meaningful relationship, especially with people living in Colombia, a place where I've lived for 1 year and then maintain a lot of relationships. So my attempt by doing this research in geography that was maybe naive, but that's the task I've been giving to me, that is to investigate the relationships, like at the broader scale, what my relation with Colombia was entailing, like at a global scale. So that's how I've ended up, maybe I'm still kind of surprised about this, but I've ended up looking at Canadian extractivism in Colombia. So just a few words about dispossession. My idea here is not to do a geography class, but just to give you a very, very brief bit of context. This is a word that's coming from David Harvey that is basically considered, as I just learned, the father of the human geography. And what he did basically is that he used the Marxist theory of capitalism and applied it with a spatial component. And this idea of that the capital always need more space to accumulate. So this is generating dispossession and displacement. And in the case of my research, I'm especially looking at the legal process of this dispossession in Colombia that happened in recent time, which I would say since the 90s. And that this dispossession that enable land grabbing by multinational mining companies who are mostly Canadian. So the Grammality project, very briefly, maybe why is this worth studying? It's supposed to be the biggest open mine in Colombia and second of importance in Latin America. It's actually, and it's only dedicated, it should be dedicated only to gold extraction, which is also bringing some challenge out because we don't necessarily need gold, right? And here's, you can see the list of the different companies that have been part of the exploration phase that started in 1995, sorry. So a bunch of them are Canadian and another one is from Mexico. I'm just gonna take water. So an interesting fact is that even if David Harvey have this like very omnipresent, like this powerful notion of capital having force and like being this, I don't know, monstrous thing that have power, still those projects are very fragile. The project, so that's what I need to do. What I need to tell you on the left, I've put those logos so you can identify them. So B2Gold, now Grammality project, is owned 50% by B2Gold, a mining company registered in Canada, and the other 50% is held by AngloGold Ashanti, which is from South Africa. So they act locally beyond the name of the Grammality Colombia Limited. So you have the logo just at the end. And the interesting fact that I wanted to share is that just after the left president have been elected last August, the project have been shelved by its official companies, like proprietary, yeah. And just recently, as I was preparing the presentation, I've learned since last week, sorry, it's open to sell. So just it's something it's going on there, but yeah. So here's just, as I'm in geography, I guess it's important to place this project. So here you have the map of Colombia. What you see in red is all the Seas mining exploitation grant. I think it's from 2015, so it's not accurate from right now. And so just a zoom, oh, sorry. So just a zoom, like where is exactly situated the Grammality project. So in this presentation that need to be brief, I'll be presenting in a very complex and maybe trivial way, 3 iteration of my project, just to situate like which process I went through. And I'm open to critics, honestly. Like I know Selena Couture was talking about this idea of discomfort, and I guess that all those 3 steps were me trying to reposition myself towards the project. Yeah. So first round, I would say, it was, oh yeah, I have title that I've written. I guess this first round was the enthusiasm phase, where I was dreaming of being an ally from the university and work collectively. Yeah. So yeah, and so that's where I was in contact, and that's actually interesting because the first step of this project was collaborative at this point, was presented at For Space here last March. But so just very briefly, I've been in contact with a commission of Canadian delegates that went to Colombia, and they collect a lot of testimonies, including testimonies from traditional miners that are organizing since the arrival of the multinational in their country. So I've been having a very close informal input from those testimonies, and I was expecting it to use them in my thesis. And I've did the whole ethical process approval, and I've also had the approval from the organization that collected the testimonies. But then, due to a numerous of factors, and I might just name some of them, I had to change plan. There was this divergent perspective among the organization of like who really owns the data and to who I should ask. And to be very honest, I think that it's also, I was okay with moving beyond and stepping back, because I didn't feel that, even it would be nice to have like an academic, so like something that is in the paper, or not ROC, but at paper, like official statement that is sharing the experience of those people. I wasn't really feeling comfortable to be this voice of those people that are so far away from me, right? So that's when I've decided to look somewhere else, and the title I give to this new thing is, I guess, embracing complexity and trying to find the adequate framework. And in a way, I was trying, my main interest since the beginning was always to think how I can enact like the global, or relate to the global and the globality of my presence in Canada with the impacts in Colombia. So yeah, in a very abstract way, but it's which is great, because I've ended up reading a lot of things that informed me a lot and put great words on the, I guess, interior insight I had. I'll maybe just mention, for the sake of this residency, that I was thrilled to discover the work of Anna Tsing, which is not talking about the global as like an abstract thing that is haunting us, but something that is really happening in very specific places with specific person and actions. So kind of a vision of very site-specific view of the globality. So I've decided that I should look for those points of friction, and this is one tentative way of mapping all those places related to the Grammarly project, like where does the gold go, the laboratory, the legal state thing, and so that's tentative, and that's another also tentative way of understanding also Tsing theory, where there's different scale operating, and how there's overlap between, like, for example, Canadian protectionism again with mining companies, and how it could relate to national politics in Colombia, for example, and the gold price. But this, I realized, would need a PhD to be really grasped carefully. So I was kind of losing myself somewhere in this, yeah. So I had to leave things apart. But one thing that they didn't want to leave is this idea of studying up that have been framed by Laurent Nader. So especially when you're coming from a privileged position, the idea of studying how power is functioning can be very relevant from a perspective like while doing research. So I had to look and see and try to find where, from a perspective, like from the up, where can I grasp those site of powers, no? If I'm about to study power. And I knew that like in the sites, power wouldn't really be present in a way. And also I can't access those sites, but I'm here in Montreal. So how can I relate to this? And I think in a moment, like, are those sites of power are in B2 Gold Tower, for example, but I guess those buildings weren't saying enough. So finally, final step, which was a big revelation, yeah. It's this idea of doing archival work, which is, I think, a very, well, it depends, but I think it's opened the doors for more ethical research from where I'm situated. So this is my site. You can see it. So on your left, you have a list of all the possession of the Gramercy Columbia Limited. So I may repeat, it's the joint venture possessed by B2 Gold and Anglo-Gauge Ashanti. So it's 57 lots in total. And on your right, you have one of those 57 lots. It's a property certificate. And what is quite interesting is that those property certificates are easy to access. It's like $5 to have one. You do need an ID, Colombian ID, to have it. And then you have all the legal transaction that are referring to the lot. So it's full of information to understand how the territory have been moving. And maybe you may ask, like, okay, why? And I'm also asking, why should I look at this? And I guess it's still unresolved. But I do have the feeling that looking at those things from the lens of the Gramercy project will help me to understand how extractive multinational interfere with the land conflict in Colombia, and see how Canada have a certain, in a way, a responsibility in the violence going on there. And if you want, this is an insight that kind of have been confirmed quite quickly when I've started looking at this, because if you see, so this lot, Hacienda Guacharacas, is a very complex lot. So the image I'm showing you is coming from an investigation from Ivan Cepeda. He's a lawyer and congressist man in Colombia. And he's been doing a lot of work to link that's complex, but yeah, to link the portfolio, I guess, of Álvaro Uribe, who was a former president of Colombia, from the left, that is also responsible for a lot of land concentration in Colombia. And this is a photo of a paramilitary in this very same place, so the Guacharacas. Okay, and I will be resuming after. So, yeah, it's a complex story, and I definitely don't have enough time to explain all of this. But my intent, in a way, is to look carefully at the data. I'm still like building my framework of like what I'll be specifically looking at. And my idea, this is the lot I was talking about in GIS. So my idea is to use conventional cartographic tools alongside with more creative practices, and to recreate like a new way of mapping this project and understand especially how it intersects with Canada or Canadian multinationals. And just a final word, so these are like excerpts from the image, the mapping image that are used by the mining company. So I guess even if it's very solitary and tentative, my idea is to create a kind of a contour mapping imagery to be in dialogue with the drawn image of this project that have been used to displace and control. So yeah, thank you very much.
Is the sound okay? Sorry, I'm making a lot of noise. Better? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so wait. Is that me? It is. It wasn't off. Okay, now it is off. Okay, so I'll start by explaining a little bit, and then I'll turn to the video, and then at that point we can turn off the lights and take us from the screen. Okay, so in my PhD here at Concordia, I've been trying to develop or starting to develop something that I call a poetics of violence. So this is a research on the aesthetic potential of violence and destruction as an interdisciplinary methodology for the creation of situated performances that use poetic, aesthetic, or dramatic violence as a tool for collective memory, epistemic decolonization, and sovereignty. This poetics of violence argues that rituals, community performances, and reenactments that use poetic, aesthetic, or dramatic violence generate a carnivalesque sense of the world that suspend the hegemonic rules of power. So I'm especially interested in these kinds of violence that I'm putting there. So carnivalesque violence that reverses dichotomies such as oppressor and oppressed, victim and perpetrator, empowering the oppressed. Iconoclasm that supports collective memory and communal agency by disarticulating the politics of memory. Aesthetic violence that performs epistemic subversion by the linking from Western aesthetics and canon. In symbolic violence that contests physical, ideological, and structural violence exerted by the state, its apparatuses, and other agencies of power, such as organized crime and transnationals. In violent theater, which transforms consciousness. And in violent protests that exert political action in struggles for justice and sovereignty. So I'm going to try to explain a little bit about what I mean by this by presenting a project. The project's name is Kurirani no Ambakiti, Burning the Devil, since that's the only way they listen to us. And it was co-authored with the Communal Indigenous Council of Arantepacua. And it's a Sorry, I don't know why it does that every time I share my screen. Yeah, there it is. I have, give me 1 second. Sorry, guys. There you go. Okay, so I'll start by presenting this project that explores, so in the context of this residency, I believe this project explores the situated, spatial, and performative possibilities of violence, destruction, sound, tactility, and affect. So if you can turn off the lights, thank you. No. How do I do it? Why is it doing this? Sorry, guys, this is so frustrating. Should have practiced this. This one? This one. the sound, right? Okay, there you go. No, it's still doing that.
We're not hearing sound in this space.
Oh, but we need to hear the music from the video. There you go. Can you turn it higher? The sound from the video? No, this has to be off. Really? But it gives the... Is it okay? You cannot get this. That's fine. Okay, let's do it without the sound because, I mean, it's going to be impossible with the reverb. There's no sound. That's fine, it's okay. The harm inflicted by the Michoacán State Police to the Purépecha community of Arantepacua in central Mexico on April 5, 2017 is irreparable. At 2:45 p.m., an operation of thousands of police officers, 300 according to the media, the entire police force of the state of Michoacán, headed to Arantepacua. The bells resounded, the community's emergency call. The police did not come to have a dialogue, but to generate a confrontation. They entered shooting tear gas with a rhinoceros, the colloquial name for a kind of armored tank, and with dozens of pickups and vans, in addition to 3 helicopters. The shooting lasted 2 to 3 hours. It looked like a war. 4 community members were killed and another 9 were detained. Families had to hide from the police, who looted their houses. The comuneros, a Spanish term implying that community members are not only neighbors, but share a commitment for the common good, had to defend themselves with sticks and stones, run to the hills, flee. At 5:30 p.m., a military convoy approached Arantepacua from its other entrance. They were looking for a red truck, and only that one they took. The use of roadblocks and the holding up of trucks are some of the few strategies left for Arantepacua's community members and for many other marginalized communities in the region and in the country to make themselves heard by the government. It's the only way they listen to us. That red truck was one of 20 trucks held in Arantepacua to object to the arrest by the police of 38 comuneros who had traveled to Morelia, the state's capital, the previous day to negotiate the boundaries of their territory with the neighboring community of Capacuaro, an ancient and ongoing dispute. Years ago, when Arantepacua supported the teachers' union strike instigated by the biased educational reforms imposed by the federal government, more than 30 vehicles were detained in the town, but no one came to release them. No operation against drug trafficking has ever been this big. We know that the government is complicit with organized crime. We believe that that truck had something illegal: weapons, drugs, organs, bodies. We will never be able to forget. There are many consequences of psychological trauma. What was our crime? Being indigenous? Being marginal? Arantepacua has always been a community en pie de lucha, always ready to fight and support social struggles, a pebble in the government's shoe, since social conscience has always proved an obstacle for power and oppression. The lack of state support and social projects for indigenous communities has led us to marginalization, and the lack of opportunities and employment in the community have encouraged migration to the United States. One of the greatest concerns for the community, especially for the Normalista elementary school teachers, is the loss of the Purépecha language due to acculturation processes accelerated by migration. Their constant struggle to defend their ancestral territory, their sovereignty, and self-determination based on the practices of their Tatakeri grandparents also seeks to strengthen and revitalize the Purépecha language and culture within the community and in other communities of the region to become a tool against acculturation and in favor of communality. This fight for the well-being of the community requires opening people's eyes and an awakening of social conscience. The fight for justice and the social good is the fight against dispossession, private property, and neoliberalism. A saga of resistance against oppression that can be traced back to colonial times and that is more recently associated with the rejection of the neoliberalist ideal of progress and the exploitation of resources by governments, private investors, and drug cartels, is what allowed a small and marginalized indigenous community to recover from an extreme act of incommensurable and incomprehensible state-sanctioned violence. The damage of the April 5th attack is irreparable, but mourning did not result in silence as the government expected. Repression fueled rage, which in turn invigorated the demand for sovereignty. On the evening of the day of the attack, the community, although devastated, called on a meeting for the purposes of political reorganization. After the traumatic event, Arantepacua decided to reject and effectively expel police parties and the local police. Community members stayed on guard for several nights in case the police came back. On April 7, a barricade was built at the entrance of the community, and on April 8 at 12:30 p.m., a community patrol, the Cuaricha, was founded. The state of Michoacán officially recognized their decision to adopt self-government in 2018, but Arantepacua still demands that those responsible for the April 5th attack are brought to justice. The aftermath of these events might be irreparable, but the way these and similar moments in history are narrated and remembered can be either empowering or defeating. Resisting being silenced is as important as resisting repression. As Michel Rolf-Trouillot points out in Silencing the Past, history is the fruit of power, and there has always been an unequal access to the production of historical narratives. I argue that this condition can be challenged by dismantling and subverting the perpetrator-victim, victor/defeated, and oppressor/oppressed dichotomies through reenactment, performance, and the dramatic use of violence and destruction, by adding a decolonial how to Peter Burke's important question about the politics of memory, that is, who wants whom to remember what and why. Who gets to narrate and how are both questions about power, since the latter implies questioning imposed modes of memory making, usually written, that need to be disarticulated in order to break the silences, the link, and reclaim power. According to Trouillot, and I quote, any historical narrative is a particular bundle of silences that result of a unique process, and the operation required to deconstruct these silences will vary accordingly, end of quote. I argue that a first step to deconstruct the bundle of silences brought on by assault and oppression is to reject the victim as a disempowered political figure, since victimization is a strategy of control and oppression, as Daniel Giglioli, in his Crítica de la Víctima, points out. Against victimization, I propose challenging the monopoly of violence, the exclusive use of physical force by the state, extended by it to organized crime, transnationals, etc., by using dramatic violence as a decolonial aesthesis. According to Walter Mignolo, decolonial aesthesis, with a capital S for emphasis, and I quote, is an option that delivers a radical critique to modern, postmodern, and altermodern aesthetics, and simultaneously contributes to making visible decolonial subjectivities at the confluence of popular practices of re-existence, artistic installations, theatrical and musical performances, literature and poetry, sculpture, and other visual arts, end of quote. In my work, I use poetic violence and destruction to make visible, remember, and purge, but also to delink. I argue that when violence is torn away from the dominant and colonizing discourse, its aesthetic, ritual, collective, and affective potential can be unleashed, challenging overpowering dichotomic categorizations that lead to victimization. Dramatic, poetic, aesthetic violence pushes against hegemonic formal means for the production of historical narratives by adding performative layers to the narrations. It allows a shift from recounting to reenacting, from the verbal to the embodied, thus the linking from Western canonical modes of retelling and remembering. The main component of Kurirani no Ambakiti is a life-size papier-mâché rhinoceros that functions as a proxy for the rhinoceros tank used by the police forces and allegorically embodies the harm and evil inflicted on the community of Arantepacua. Made by a collective of pyrotechnicians or Cueturis in Cherán, the first and largest Purépecha community to gain political autonomy back in 2011 through an armed movement led by women, the effigy was carried in a procession along the same route of the yearly commemoration procession of the April 5th events. Afterwards, the rhinoceros was destroyed with fireworks and burnt in the main plaza of Arantepacua, while local pireris, traditional Purépecha musicians, performed pirecuas, traditional songs in Purépecha, created for the project. For the finale, the Cueturis cut off the animal's head, which was then suspended as a trophy, accompanying the video documentation of the performance that was part of the installation presented at Centro Cultural Clavijero in Morelia. Pyrotechnics were introduced in the 16th century by Franciscan priests in what is now Mexico as spectacular and violent components of autos sacramentales, or conversion plays, crafted to spiritually conquer the indigenous peoples and convert them to Catholicism. Fireworks were used as a tool to frighten and punish, as a sensorial representation of hell and suffering. But since then, pyrotechnic effects have been integrated into popular festive traditions in Mexico and other parts of Latin America as a form of catharsis, purge, celebration, and even criticism and protest, which in my view reveals that the violent tools of the oppressor have been subverted and turned into tools for resistance. Anchored in popular culture and in cultural traditions from the margins, from the subaltern, popular effigy burning rituals such as the burning of Judas are self-determined, self-organized, and community-funded celebrations in which social rules and roles are challenged to allow new and empowered narratives to emerge. They are subversive carnivals, similar to what Mikhail Bakhtin describes in his Problems of Dostoevsky's Poetics, celebratory political acts of resistance to what Aníbal Quijano calls the coloniality of power. This resistance is through a performative, immersive, cathartic, excessive, destructive, and disobedient decolonial aesthetic experience. These rituals collectively and allegorically eliminate evil, harm, and treason, using violence and destructions as materials to purge, but also to make visible and remember. The aesthetic violence of the burning of the rhinoceros in Arantepacua was intended as a form of purging, of catharsis, but above all, it sought to undermine the politics of memory, empower community members, and support the healing of collective trauma. It used dramatic violence to challenge state violence by making visible the excessive use of force by the police. Destruction was used as a memory-building artifact to contest and subvert physical, ideological, and structural violence, and to recover and celebrate situated narratives. The aesthetic and affective potential of violence was employed as a tool for epistemic decolonization and liberation, to the link from the conventional Western construction of historical narratives to carnivalized victimization against silences, and for a restructuring of the politics of memory, considering that, as Frantz Fanon maintained, decolonization is always a violent event. And so I know my time is probably gone, so I just wanted to mention that the other parts of the video that you were seeing are other elements of the installation of the project. So Archivo Bordado de la Resistencia is an embroidered archive that was also produced there in Arantepacua, so the first images that you saw. And then all of the text that I was quoting, and you also saw the quotes on screen, those are all from interviews that I did in Arantepacua. And then there are also many sculptures, so you saw there were police cars, so that was part also of the installation. And then the last part of the presentation, you saw some of the community workshops that we did like 6 months after the project was completed. And one of them was actually to turn the police cars into cuaricha cars. It was a workshop with children, because that's kind of what happened, right? Like they expelled the police, and now they have their own police. So we physically turned the police cars into cars of the cuaricha, and now they're playing with them, hopefully, in the town. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. We have about 10 minutes for responses, questions, thoughts for the final panel.
I'm sorry about all that mess with the sound.
Hi, it's just something that resonates to me when I heard you, if I understood well. My name is Deborah, before everything. When you told that you don't feel, if I understood well, that you don't feel comfortable being the voice of those people, is that right? Yes, I heard that, and I just wanted to point that being an insider, I'm South American, that everything depends on the position that we have, because in the global South, the minorities will never have a voice heard if someone from inside of the system does not enhance their voices. It's not like, I don't like the expression giving voice, because for me it's totally colonialist, but being like enhancing voice of the minority is not talking by them, but let them talk through you. So if we have this position, then yes, we can do a magnificent collaboration, I would say that. Just wanted to point that because it really stuck, and I wanted to go ahead, get this into your archive, and I think you can do a beautiful work to let the world, or let a part of the, I would say system, as maybe is not the best word, but to see what's happening, because people don't know. They read, they see, but they don't know. Just a point.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much for all your work. It's great to have such an exciting panel on the last session. And I have questions for each of you, and I can talk afterwards at more length. What I'm thinking a lot about form, and actually, Amanda, you and I talked a bit about technology and sound in particular, and intimacy. And I was wondering, in your collaboration, in the feminist work that you're doing, if you also work with experimental, like if there's any experimental formal work that you're doing that are also about that kind of connection. And actually, Adela, in this last work, you're talking about violence, but as I was watching that embroidered pieces, I was thinking about the amount of care and time it takes to create that such work, but also the kind of, I guess the amount of care it would also take to create a violent act. So, right, especially if you're trying to perform violence, but actually not inflict violence, and that kind of a care. And then also for you, Sarah, your engagement with dispossession and just the grappling with that, and I'm noticing absolutely the care that you're taking in your position with that. And there's two thoughts. One has to do with what you're finding in those legal documents. That I've also wallowed around in property documents and tried to trace how is this Indigenous land changing its form over this time, and what's triggering that. And there's an enormous amount of information in those documents, even who's signing them, like all of that is incredible. And then in terms of you trying to create this geography research creation piece, there's a wonderful quote that I actually just heard a few days ago at a different panel by an Anishinaabe scholar named Leanne Beresamasake Simpson, who has a great piece about dispossession, or like great phrase that she said about dispossession is that the opposite of dispossession is not possession, it is attachment. And I think that the creative form could actually work, because if we think of possession and dispossession, we were falling into the capitalist trap, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that your determination to try and somehow make this a research creation project is a great impulse that I encourage you to follow. So these are all just my comments. Generally, I'm thinking about form. If any of you want to respond about that, that would be great.
I think now, as you mentioned, intimacy is a great starting point for our collective, because actually with Laura Balboa, we decided that sorority will be an interesting word. Also, we are reviewing what it means in philosophical terms, also coming from bell hooks. And we understand that in the case of Marcela Lagarde, sororidad, it's also as a way of connection against or fighting or resisting gender violence. And our collective started because Laura Balboa and I, we were, and this is where we go to the word victims, but we experience gender violence by the same subject, which is also a sound artist, and by many patriarchal circles in Mexico that are extremely taken over, and really they do project, and they do have like now it's being challenged by all these feminist and non-binary and queer sound movements, but we started by that connection of intimacy through resisting one experience of gender violence. And then from there, we actually talk about that in some of the panels, which was very, very difficult, but it went through, and then that kind of like echoed to other people, other folks that also experience that, and also they're not necessarily, or they don't categorize themselves as a women. Then we understood that that should be opened up, and it's necessary. And then in terms of the form, we are going to start a project soon to be shown in Alberta for the Kias, Kias Center of I think Acknowledge, or Center of Other Acknowledges, or so they are trying to understand how acknowledged production is developed. And then in this case, they invite us because we are producing this acknowledge collectively, and we're kind of like challenging the idea of one single author. And that's why right now I'm very humbled to present work that we've been doing together, but also their work. So this kind of layers in how this formation can be developed through artistic practices. That's where we are going to start working next year through sound production on sound essays. So yeah.
Thank you.
I guess I would take the opportunity that you opened up to talk a little bit about the textiles themselves, right? And not only the textiles, but in general. So of course the textiles, I mean, it was like a lot of labor, right? For sure. And it was labor that was done by women in the community and by the neighboring community. And we worked together. At some points we got together and worked together. At some points each one worked on their own. It was also during the pandemic, so it was also like another challenge. But something that, so I'm very keen into investigating how situated knowledges and situated cultural practices, which I think are knowledges, right, are tools. Are tools not only for the preservation of culture and knowledge, but also for resistance, right? So in this project in particular, so we used textiles, and it's a cross stitch because that's the kind of textile that is used in that area for dresses usually, and also like the woodwork that we did and the pottery. So it all comes from the knowledge of the communities that live in that area, right? So I truly believe that, I hate this distinction between craft and arts. I just believe it's just like another Western way of like splitting things. So I think that kind of art and situated knowledge is something that I like to investigate as a means of political action and resistance, right? So the project I'm doing now in Peru, for example, so now I'm looking into other kinds of art and situated knowledges over there, right? That have to do more with wrestling, for example, right? And other forms of ritual violence that I believe are also ways, as I was trying to explain, right? Subversive ways of going against the grain of what violence supposedly is, right? Yeah. Thank you.
I think we have time for one more quick one, just being aware that fourth space does close, but
We have one.
Thank you for the panel, very inspiring by your works and thoughts. For Amanda, I was thinking about this relation between the listen and the skin when you are talking about the virtualized bodies, no? Because we had this residency 1 month ago with some of our colleagues, and she has this practice of listen with the skin, through the skin, remembering that the ear actually is a skin going inside of the body. So they have a lot of practices about, listen to the land, listen to the other through the vibration. So if you have any thoughts about this relation between the sonic and the haptic, but also, this the color, the relation of skin and color that goes beyond of the haptic gesture. So maybe, I don't know if you have any thoughts about this. It would be great. And I was thinking, oh my God, sorry.
Adela.
Adela. When you put that list of types of violence, I was thinking about the ritual violence too. You talking through Fanonian perspective, and in his book, he has the chapter, Los Condenados en la Tierra. The first chapter is on violence, right? So he's talking about how the dispossession, in another perspective, the idea of the dispossession and the rituals are very important for the colonized body to imagine the possibility to how to say this, to return the violence to the oppressor, right? Because the dispossession is a kind of power also to, produce some kind of violence against the oppression. So if you, how you frame the ritual violence in those, because you put here symbolic violence, theater violence, violent theater, symbolic violence, or aesthetic violence, where the ritual maybe will combine all of this. And the last, Sarah, I agree with Deborah. I think yes, we have to think about what is our position when we are talking with the other or to the other. So it's more than don't talk, because also don't talk is what the whiteness love to do. Like they never make self consciousness of their own violence, their own problems they are creating to the South, to the people of colors, and etc. So it's more this reflection that you have about your process maybe should be included in your research. Like that's the ethical, actually. The ethics is think about which kind of relation I'm doing with the other, that without I could not do my own practice. So yes, do it.
Do we have time for the response, or? Yeah, okay. So as your response, I think for me, as a sound walker, so my practice is actually sound walking. So I do explore listening through the act of walking. So the most obvious thing I can say, I can listen with my feet. What that means, I'm listening with my own body, but then my body has certain codifications and has certain identities that will imply and reflect upon why things that I'm listening in the street. things that I'm listening in spaces in the context of a site. So I'm listening not only through ears, I'm also listening through my identity. I'm listening through being an immigrant woman of color walking in Montreal. In those implications upon what that means is going to be also what I receive through the exploration or like the ambience of listening. So I can listen harassment, I can also listen total invisibility, I can also listen. So there is so many layers that are implicit in also my skin, in the skin of, and that comes with the codification of how my skin is being seen. And gender specifically is extremely important in my work. And I've been working with Vivas, for example, Vivas Collective in Argentina, and they do a lot of listening through sensorial aspects of the memories and also experiences of being women attending to the protest, and how listening collectively through a movement of screaming, a movement of actually enacting protest and resistance in the public space as a body of thousands, have like a very important relationship of listening, like the memory listening, or listening these memories. So yeah, that's one of the answers that I can share with you.
So your question, I'm going to try to be short. I mean, rituals of violence is like an umbrella term that I usually use, right, to talk about all of the other kinds of violence. I mean, it's not an exhaustive list that one I put there. It's just kind of what interests me about these rituals of violence, basically, no? And it's also like me trying to understand, you know, what's the difference when the violence is exerted, you know, in let's say in real life, that when it's dramatized, right, or aestheticized, right, which is still in real life. So for me, that's it's an interesting connection, right? So how can this that we believe is performance and theater is actually also part of this political protest, right? They're not that separate, right? And I think that gives us also a different understanding of what violence is and what even like rituals of violence are. And I guess I'm also very interested in understanding this specifically in the context of the post-colony, right? So specifically Latin America, but in general, like talking, you know, thinking about Membe, for example, right? And thinking about also internal colonialism, right? So it's not only like violence that's exerted, let's say, from outside, but it's within, right? So this internal colonialism, which is a term developed by González Casanova, but also Membe has a similar term in his own writing. So how this like politics of violence, internal, external, you know, it's very complex, right? The complexities of that, but without, because I think that violence is a very easy term, right? Like everyone talks about violence as if it was one thing. And it's like this huge, like different, you know, and it depends on from which side you're seeing it, right? From which perspective, and even from which discipline, right? So I'm kind of trying to unpack that in some way in my work.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We have a few thank yous, of course. First of all, Fourth Space for always being such a phenomenal space to work with. Thank you for the live stream. Thank you for all of the tech, all of the help. And of course, thank you to the other panelists and people who spoke. It always feels like a really special and indulgent time to get to spend an afternoon with a like captive audience, but also like a very helpful and informative and very, very, very knowledgeable audience. And so from our side, thank you very, very much for being here. And for the respondents, thank you very, very much for your thoughts and your input and questions. And thank you to Pulse, and thank you for the residency week that we get to carve out this time. I know it's a really packed schedule for the week, and to spend an entire afternoon doing this is beyond valuable for us. And so thank you, Shona. Thank you for putting it in this student symposium to the week. And so on behalf of Sarah and I will speak for you because you just did a panel. thank you for coming to the Grad Student Symposium today. And we are now wrapped, and I believe fourth space closes in a short 9 minutes. Not to boot anybody out, but